clarify, for chronic over-talking, you'll send people down. Is that one of the rules?
No, I did not give that type of a warning.
You just warned Jane.
I warned her specifically in her own.
So everyone else can overtalk, just not me.
Good standard, just Jane.
And if it's the case that other someone else in particular, like Jovan, seems excessive, I'll warn him personally as well.
Wait, so it's just right?
And I would even warn you as well if that's appropriate right now.
So if the rule is no over,
I'm just letting you know.
You don't warn anyone, then it seems like a rule for everyone, right? So I don't understand what you want to say.
What's the standard again? Just individual people you're gonna mod, but not the rest of them?
I'm not gonna put a rule out here. I'm just gonna say, listen, there's a full stage here. We're all adults, hopefully. If you're not going to act like an adult, I'm going to let you know. I'm going to let you know you're not acting like an adult. You're interrupting. You're being disruptive. I'm going to call you out by name, and then
Gavin. That's why people are calling out Gavin. You need to call out Gavin.
I'm going to deal with it
for his behavior.
Right. So if disruptive and overtalks and doesn't act like an adult, you're going to call him out, correct?
Did you mention Gavin? Someone was trying to overtalk you. So you said Gavin?
Well, you just said if anyone doesn't act like an adult, overtalks, disrupts the stage, you're going to call them out. So that's everyone you do that to, right?
Correct. And I'll tell you what, if it's the case that, well, what about him, and what about him, and what about him, I might just send you down.
You can't point out when you're not modding to the standard you've agreed to. That's fine. That's your rule. But we will notice, right, if you do not mod fairly, if you need to treat everyone the same, surely, otherwise it wouldn't.
You can make your own determinations.
Okay, that's fine. Let's proceed.
So John has given us a standard then.
Yes, he has.
Oh, so he's saying we should do that. So he's saying we should do that, right?
Well, John, can we move forward?
May I respond to Jovan? So there's a definite standard, Jovan, right? And so it's either the case that you adhere to that standard or you do not. And if you do not, well, there are consequences. And so it's whether you ought to or not is dependent upon what you decide.
Oh, so you're giving me a hypothetical, Norm. So you're telling me what I ought to do. You're telling me what I ought to do if I had. You're telling me what I ought to do if I had certain desires, right?
No, sir. I'm not.
This is pissing
Wait. Jack, did he not, wait, John, one second. Jack,
no, there is no 1 second, sir. I'm going to send you down if you keep interrupting, okay? Let me be crystal clear to you. This particular discussion about normativity is not going to continue with you on the stage. And if you do persist in this normativity nonsense, you will be sent down.
I think that's a hypothetical.
Is he chronically interrupting me?
Let's not have J Mike come in because he's going to be in big trouble.
Well, let's hear what Gavin has.
Can we move forward, John? John, can we move forward? Because this is
is there any topic someone would like to talk about?
Yes, John.
Okay, Gavin.
Okay.
You want to mention something?
Yeah, Rob Speakers has written a paper about. It's not even a paper, but he's written something about the logical problem of evil. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because it's easy to destroy.
I've talked to him a lot of times too over the months about the problem of evil. He's actually informed me of a lot of things. He seems pretty knowledgeable about the subject, and so you want to address his argument, Gavin?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I just they tried this once before, right? You remember, John? So Rob Gavin to affirm necessary properties before he could proceed. Gavin refused, right? And so the whole thing was just a waste of time. And unless Gavin is going to actually go along and accept the necessary properties that Rob proposed, then the debates are pointless because it doesn't work if you don't accept this property.
But the better question again, is Rob interested? Have you confirmed with Rob that he's interested?
Well, I've been trying to, but he keeps ducking and running from me.
Rob, are you there?
Maybe, yeah, I'm here, and I've got a call that's coming in between now and 11, so it may well be that I will have to it'll come in, I can't say exactly when it is, so it might not be the perfect time here because I'll be interrupted, just suddenly, so.
Okay. Maybe a little
Gavin, do you have a quick summary rebuttal to his argument? Okay, so firstly, it's not my paper.
Send us the paper and then we can put it up the top.
Yeah, no worries. It's not my paper, though. It's the argument that Venus put forward that I defend, which I think is valid and sound.
This argument is terrible, but I'd like to read the paper and see if there's like a better rendition of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Rob,
I want to read the paper and destroy it because it's nonsense.
Well,
Yeah,
Gavin, do you have a quick
properties, so.
summary?
How about this? Have certain atheists, are they aware of Rob's paper, and would they like to support it and defend it?
Yeah, Daniel could do it, Jovan could do it,
Yeah, Johnny, can I make a comment real quick about Gavin?
There's about 4 atheists who could just take over from Rob if necessary.
No problem. We'll destroy you all.
Gavin, did you hear that I've canceled the debate scheduled for Saturday? Did you get?
I heard that, but it's all right. There's somebody else who's going to take your place. Someone who's got a spine.
I have moral issues with debating somebody with brain damage, so I'm not. I don't think it's right.
You have no courage and no spine. You're just a typical clubhouse atheist.
Yeah, it's.
But you do have. No, you do have brain damage, though, right? And I actually predicted. You know what I predicted, Mo? I predicted that you would actually back down, and that Gavin would suit up and show up and be prepared. That's what I predicted.
Well,
You're right.
Mental problems and a history of depression and brain damage.
You're spot on, John. So let's move on to this paper, shall we? Let's move on to this paper of Rob.
And I don't think.
Okay,
I don't think.
Let's move on.
Advantage of
Let's
somebody
move on.
talking to
Hey, Mo,
Let's move on.
Let's put it this way, okay? Thank you for informing us. The debate is no longer ongoing, and so that's everyone who didn't know that, we know that now, and then so we can move on. Maybe
it's a moral. It's a moral.
The debate is still on, John.
We're done with
John,
that.
the debate is still on, but there's a
Gavin, we're done with that, okay? Hey, Gavin, can we be done with that, please? No,
Absolutely. Let's move on.
Thank you.
You can't be done with brain damage like it's permanent.
Come on, Mo.
John,
Mo,
something you should know, honestly. Before we proceed, there's honestly something you should know. And it would be unkind for us to do this sort of thing with Gavin. Under penalty of perjury, Gavin has testified that there was some brain damage that he does have. And this is a matter of public record. So I think that anybody that either debates with him or encourages him in any way or mocks him is going to be wrong. And I can show you the evidence. I can show you the evidence.
No, I don't need any evidence. So the way I look at it, Daniel, he was a professional kickboxer, amateur kickboxer, I don't know, but he was a kickboxer. And so he's going to take some headshots just like anyone would. And I know people who also, football players, concussions, and so forth. And so are they somehow disabled in some way? Not necessarily.
No, this was Gavin's own.
Well, he was also. He was also helping cleaners.
Move on, John.
What I will say,
He said due to his brain damage, he
I will
can't
say,
Let's move on from this pettiness.
Yeah, so
John, let's move on from
what
this
I will say,
pettiness.
Daniel, is that
Bob, this
certainly
is
does
serious.
not qualify anyone no more than some of these other people in these other groups who are seeing psychiatrists.
No,
on
this is his
medication
opinion.
and so forth.
John.
Okay, and
Throw
so,
him to the sharks then.
so if we're not going to
No, this is his opinion, though, John. He said he was taken advantage of due to his brain damage and his.
As far as this conversation about each other, personal, this or that, is pretty much done. The subject on the table is the problem of evil, as the title says.
Rob seems to have the paper. You guys are either willing to defend it or not. I would actually like to get in the mix because this is one of my favorite topics, along with morality. But I'll try to just moderate it, and we'll try to defend it on each side.
Yeah. John, can I back message? John, would you like to pin the paper to the top of the page, just so everybody's got access to it?
I would love to pin it if you have a link for it.
I'll send it to you.
I'll send it to you. I'll back channel. Oh yeah, okay, Hedy, thanks for that.
Yeah, and don't worry
You
about
do
it.
understand, though, Jerry, that was his own claim for his own brain damage, right? He made that.
Quiet, Jane. You be quiet. We've moved on from there.
Hey, Gavin, are you?
Yeah, he was upset that somebody took advantage of
And he
him.
swore himself in on the Bible. Remember that, John. He swore himself in on the Bible under perjury. Hang on.
John, please let me finish, man.
Hang on. I'm warning Mo, Jane, Jovan, and Daniel. You 4 individuals. You bring this up again, I'm sending you down.
Let me try this.
So,
Come on, Jamie.
we're not supposed to talk about brain damage. Is that correct?
Put him down. Put him down.
I just want to be clear about.
Put him down.
John is...
I don't need your help, Gavin. Okay?
Gavin, keep your pants
I don't
on.
need your help on how to mod. I've already given the warning. In any case, I pinned up the link. This is sent to me by Rob, and so I'd like to take a look at it myself. Seen some of his arguments. I don't know if it's one I've seen before, but it's kind of long. Well, maybe not that long. Would anyone like to discuss it?
Yeah, I do.
Talk about the thing on the table. What's the thing that's on everybody's mind, right?
Okay, so let me go through it with you, Gab. Premise number 1, if God exists, then God is a morally perfect being. Do you agree with that premise?
Yes. Yeah, no problem with that premise.
Premise number 2, the world is morally imperfect now. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, premise number 3, if God is a morally perfect being, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect.
That's a huge fallacy of begging the question.
Can I just...
Okay, so you're saying that you don't agree with that premise?
Not at all. Premise 3 is a fallacy of begging the question. But
you don't know what the conclusion is.
But there's others.
John, when Rob, we talked about this last time.
I would actually agree with that premise, Gavin.
Yeah, but
You can't deny that.
Gavin's too dumb to.
Listen.
Otherwise, there's evil before creation.
Can I just clarify, when the word world is used there, right, don't think about the universe or like the planet Earth, right? It just means existence, right?
Right.
People were confused before. So if you understand world just to mean existence, the idea is prior to creation, all that existed was God. That's
right.
the idea.
Well, that's the implicit understanding, is it not?
Oh, you'd be surprised. Because people...
Okay. Well, thank you for,
Well, can we just, how is it, like, John, you said you agree that it's begging the question?
No,
you
I didn't say that.
He agrees.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, cool. Okay, so Gavin, explain how it's begging the question.
Yeah, that's begging the question. How is it begging the question?
Sure. Yeah, sure, Jeffrey, I'll school you on that. So, just give me a sec here.
I'm just going to read something from the internet so that I can understand how
I'm just going to read something for you. Wait 1 minute, I don't have my own thoughts. I've got to go read something. Hang on.
Alright, while he's grabbing it, just to say, I don't know how you can beg the question in the premise unless the premise itself has like an entire argument in the premise.
You can't. You can't. Let's just listen together and make a fool. It's fun.
It does. Yeah, Jeffrey, let's school you, shall we? On fallacies. So, Johnny, I'm surprised that you disagreed with the fact that premise 3 is begging the question, because...
It's that natural book.
Can you read the premise again?
Let me tell you why I agree with this. I think the world exists sans creation, is morally perfect because all that there is God, and God is morally perfect. That's my reasoning.
Okay, John, I'm going to push back against you respectfully because the Bible is silent about the word sans creation, is it not?
Not completely, because we do see a God's foreordination, the counsel of his own will, sans creation, prior to the foundations of the world. In fact, that's how it's described.
But there's no scripture in Genesis that says prior to creation the world was morally perfect, which is what premise 3 is implying, is it not?
Well, it is premises sola scriptura.
I think you could properly infer that, and because it does on several passages, talks about Revelation 13:8. I mean, the list goes on and on about a world which exists prior to Genesis 1:1.
So how's it begging the question, Gavin?
It's begging the question because it's assuming that the world, since creation, was morally perfect.
Oh my God.
That's not begging the question. You don't even know what begging the question is. Why are we doing this?
That's just the premise.
Why are we
I do know what begging the question is, Jeffrey. Would you like me to school you on that?
The premise is identical to itself.
You obviously don't understand what begging the question is because there's no way a premise alone could be begging the question.
Guys, I do understand. The premise is true.
I do understand.
Premises presuppose their truth value.
Hang on. So we could ask Rob or someone else to justify the fourth premise, right? But you are currently in rejection of it, right? So I'd like to move on a little bit and just go through the argument, see what you agree to and what you do not agree to.
He hasn't even given us what begging the. Just tell us, Gavin, what is begging the question?
Well, I think this is a distraction as far as trying to find out.
This is this is not.
John, having Gavin on stage.
Hang on. I'll tell you what. We can get to it. But I don't want to go down this rabbit hole.
John, if you want to go through the argument, you're going to have to kick John from the stage. You're going to have to kick Gavin from the stage, or else we're going to get distracted by begging the question.
Yeah, but he's the one going through the argument.
So in other words,
I thought it was John who's interested.
It's game over.
So I don't know if any other theists are here, but
I just want John to admit, for us to move on, I want John to admit that Gavin has lost already.
Yeah,
and then we can move on.
Any further?
We rejected
the premise, right? He's rejected the premise. He's rejected the argument completely, right? So he's done. We don't need to ask him about anything else.
The entailment of rejection. The entailment of rejecting that premise.
What usually goes on? Hang on. As far as Gavin's objection to the fourth premise, right? It's not the case that he even needs to provide a defeater as of yet. It is the case that.
Yes, he does.
Hang on. I'm going to give the opportunity.
Bro, this is why you can't be mod. This is why you can't be mod.
Sir,
you're so impartial.
Sir. So in any case, please don't interrupt. And so, with regard to the fourth premise, I would actually ask the author of the argument to justify their fourth premise, even before talking to Gavin. That's the way I'm going to approach it.
You've already said you accepted it. You accepted it.
I personally accept it, so I'm not.
Yeah, so why would you ask for a justification for that premise if you accept it?
Gavin.
Yeah, if you accept the premise, then you've already justified it.
John hang on. John's talking about premise 4, not premise 3. He said he would ask about premise 4, not premise 3.
Premise 4.
I'm sorry. Thank you for the correction, Jeff. I'm talking about premise 3.
So you.
Premise 3. Okay.
John, do you understand the entailment of denying premise 3? That is to say that.
I do. I think I do. I think it's.
At least
you and I both know what that represents,
John,
right, Daniel?
Yeah, John. He's going to have to say one of two things: that either that God is evil, or there's something external to God which is evil, and is co-eternal with God.
Okay, so let's just put a pin on that. On
You can't put a pin on that.
Wait up, hang on. Gavin is in rejection of premise 3, but I would like to move on, Gavin. So premise number 4, if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease.
Nobody let John move on. Nobody answered. Nobody even talked about premise 4 until he admits that Gavin's false. Nobody talked about it.
Hey, so I mean, I could easily send you down if you're going to try to rally some people around, Jovan. You've already been, interrupted.
He has a good point, John.
Okay.
Jovan has a solid point.
That we should not move on?
No,
I disagree.
Gavin's the focus of the discussion. Like, clearly this conversation is revolving around Gavin, so we can't move on until you acknowledge that Gavin's been the unit.
I would like to first and foremost go through the argument.
Sounds like he is better.
Where the point of
Well, it depends what you mean by white knighting.
And then the very first thing we're going to go back
John
to
hates white knights.
is the third premise. So if you guys could be patient, I would appreciate it. So I did want to ask Gavin, right, with regard to the argument, did you hear premise 4? Should I repeat it? And I want to know if you also...
you can move on, John. Move on to premise 4 and forget about
I did read it already, but there's a lot of distractions.
Move on to P44. He's rejected.
Why do you care about Gavin's opinion on premise 4 when he's rejected
There's
premise
too much over talking, John. You're going to have to deal with it.
It's not just Gavin, okay? It's not 5 people against Gavin as well. I'm going to pick one individual for yourselves, who that will be, whether it's Jovan or whoever else. It's not going to be 5-on-1 here. Okay, but I did want to go through with Gavin to establish where he's contending for. So premise number 4, Gavin, if God is morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, stop. John, he cannot agree to that if he rejects the previous premise. Because he's already said...
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
He doesn't...
Hang on, Haiti. Is the inverse correct as well? Because I actually object to premise 4, by the way.
You can object to premise 4 and...
I accept premise 3, by the way.
Do you understand that you can't reject premise 3 and then... You can't reject...
Accept premise 4.
You can't do it, right? Gavin's
okay. Can you accept premise 3? Hang on. Can you accept premise 3 and reject premise 4? Like that, because that would be
if your reasoning is rational, presumably you can.
Yeah, you can reject premise 4.
But not the other way around.
You see why?
Yeah, that's impossible.
Okay, we'll find out. So Gavin, you and I differ on number 3, and you and I also differ on number 4. You accept premise 4. I actually reject it. So premise number 5.
Premise 4, just quickly, John, premise 4 to me is a nothing burger premise. It doesn't really mean anything. But anyway, carry on.
It's a nothing burger.
It's the crux of the whole argument, and he says it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, his entire argument against premise 4 is it's incoherent, even though we all can make sense of it. And John can make sense of it.
Everybody began.
He's not against number 4, Jovan. And so now premise number 5, if prior to God creating anything...
Wait. Oh, he accepted it. I'm sorry, he accepted it. You're right.
If prior to God creating anything in the world was morally perfect, and the world is morally imperfect now, then the actions of God has decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. Do you agree with that?
Hell no.
Okay. The actions of God has decreased.
John, you're going to agree with this. John, you should agree with this.
I do agree with this, Jovan. Okay. So here we go again, where you actually say hell no on premise number 5, and I actually agree with it. Okay, so and then there's a C one. If God exists,
conclusion,
then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. P1 and 4 hypothesis, syllogism. Do you agree with that?
No, I reject that outright.
Okay, so let me repeat it. If God exists, his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world.
Oh, sorry, hang on.
You just agreed with it.
Wrong.
Yeah, you agree with it.
His actions cannot be
Fucking idiot.
Right.
John, this is why we mentioned the premise.
Hang on, John. If God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world.
Correct.
His actions cannot decrease. I would have to...
And he's not omnipotent.
He can't increase.
Yeah, this is why we shouldn't engage Gavin, John. This is why.
Be quiet, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, this is way outside your pay grade.
It's okay to.
Sure, Gavin. Everybody on stage is laughing at you, Gavin, but I'm the one out of my pay grade.
Be
Fantastic.
quiet, Jeffrey. Be quiet, Jeffrey.
Look, Gavin, my name is not Jeffrey, and I'm allowed to talk.
Hey, Jeff, could you just, rather than personally attack him and mock him, I'm not going to allow that any further.
Did you not hear the personal attack come out of Gavin's mouth, John? Did you not hear Gavin say it was above his pay grade?
With conclusion one.
John, did you not hear Gavin make personal attacks?
I'll tell you what. The way I look at it, Gavin's being defending himself from an attack by Jeff. That's how I look at it. Now, if Gavin's attacking,
okay, so you're just gonna white knight for Gavin no matter what he does.
I'm gonna agree with conclusion one, John.
Somebody else unprovoked, well, certainly the responsibility of Gavin. That's how I'm going to deal with it. But in any case, Gavin, I would like to get back to the argument. So, C1. Do you agree with it? If God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world.
Yes, sir, I agree with that.
Not even you can keep a straight face, John. Stop.
I'm not in my pay grade, though, guys. It's not in my pay grade. I should leave the stage now. It's out of my pay grade.
Earlier, dude. You're just gonna be. People are gonna be making fun of the guy when he doesn't know any better. Hey, what's the point of that?
Yeah, you think the best part about this, John, is you think you think we're being the asshole, John, for telling you not to have this conversation with him? But you're the asshole because you're parading this guy. You're parading this guy in front of everybody, and now everybody's laughing at his stupidity when he can't grasp this.
Can we move on?
John, you should. If you're a nice guy, you would stop this right now. Send Gavin down. Send Gavin down and stop the heckling of Gavin.
Move on, John. Can we move on from these personal issues?
Yeah. No,
I think there's a little bit of inconsistency, Gavin, in your responses. I'll just say it that way.
Okay.
But
Only a little.
But
you're just being vicious now.
Let him move on from these personal.
Yeah, I mean we do have C2 all the way to C5. But hopefully, I'll tell you what. I'll try to get it through as quick as possible.
The atheists are only defend. Look, we're trying to defend Gavin and help him out here, John.
Hang on. This is how it's going to go down.
Can I make a comment?
Johnny, can you take over? Can you stop this, Johnny?
So in other words,
James?
Tell me what, if you start send you down, sir, you don't have to be here, okay? What I am going to do, this is how it's going to go down. We're going to read through this. Gavin's going to give his answer. I'm actually going to give my answer too. And then once we do that, we're going to go back to it, and the argument, and any atheist, maybe Jovan, can start justifying these premises. How about that?
John, can I be included?
I'm fine.
Everyone else is included.
I'm fine with that, John.
No, this is David.
David, are you a theist?
David Reed.
David Wee. Yeah, yes, you can be included, sir. In fact, I welcome more theists.
John.
Oh, definitely.
John.
Hey, how you doing, by the way?
John, I'm happy with what you've proposed, but when we go back to justify our answers for the particular...
Well, that would be the burden upon the person making the argument.
So both you and I have the opportunity to justify our responses, correct?
Well, I mean, if you want to provide a defeater, that would be the optimum role for you.
Sure. Yeah.
John, you want me to give the argument for the one that he rejected, the first one? I'll tell you what. I'll put you on cue as to the go-to person first when I just go through this. It's simple. John, you already made the argument. But John, you already made the argument for us. God was the only thing that existed. God is morally perfect. Therefore, everything that existed was morally perfect. The world was morally perfect. There's the argument. You agree with that, right? He denies that. He denies that and says that's begging the question. He said that's begging the question. I understand. Now, that can't be begging the question. I understand that. He said it was extra biblical, and this is what he said, and all of this stuff. But let's just go through this argument real quickly. And then I would actually like to have people start justifying premise 4, if anything, for me personally. But let's just go. C2, I think I read it already, but let me just go over it again. If God exists, then prior to God creating anything in the world, was morally perfect. And I'm assuming that you are saying that also is begging the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I would agree with that. What about you, David? Do you agree that if God exists, then prior to God creating anything in the world, was morally perfect? How is that begging the question? Are you there, David?
He wasn't asking you, he was asking David.
That's premise 3, right? I was thinking about premise 4, which is God must...
No, it's actually C2. Yeah, I was...
Oh, you're in
C2 myself,
C2, David.
Yeah, we'll get there. I think the problem is going to be on premise 4 for the atheists, but we're on C2
I have a commentary about premise 4. Go ahead, keep going.
So we're on C2. Do you agree with that? If God exists, then prior to God creating anything in the world was morally perfect.
Do you know what that P1, P3 hypothetical syllogism means? Do you know what a hypothetical syllogism is?
Stop distracting. Come on,
that's not a distraction. It's a rule of inference.
It's a distraction.
C2 follows from P1, P3. Shut the fuck up, Gavin.
Hang on.
You know what hypothetical syllogism means?
Gavin, put your pants in parentheses, P1 and P3 hypothetical syllogism. He's saying that's an inference. That to come to C2, that they have used P1 and P3 in a syllogism to provide that inference, that conclusion too. Right? That's what you're saying, right? So, in any case, C3, if the world is morally imperfect now, then if prior to God creating anything in the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. P5 rule of exportation. I would agree with C3. Do you agree with David and also Gavin?
Well, Gavin can't agree with it because he rejected.
I agree.
P3, but maybe David agrees.
Maybe then, even though he can't, maybe he will agree, Adi. How about that?
Well, if he does agree, then he'd have to accept P3, right?
No, I don't agree with C3. I don't agree with C3 at all.
Yeah, I don't agree with C3, but I would like to...
C3 or P3?
Okay.
Well, wait a minute. You can't say that.
See what I said, Adi?
Yeah, David.
I know what you're thinking.
No, I'm not thinking anything. I'm just saying, does David know all the earlier premises? He's just jumping in.
He's able to read them.
Okay,
Yeah.
David is well aware of the syllogism, so don't worry about that.
David, do you agree with all the premises so far, or do you?
Heidi,
Something about premise.
David is well aware of the syllogism.
We looked at it last night. Agrees or not, Kevin?
So
we looked at it last night, and I think there were some technical issues, right? But apart from the technical issues, the premise 4 I think needs some expounding upon from.
I agree. I definitely agree.
And David.
Premises 1 through 3. You're not sure about premise 4, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think.
I'm on the same boat as well.
Point.
And then David doesn't have a reformed view, by the way, and so that will be interesting when we do get into this discussion. But the C4, if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God has decreased the degree of moral perfection in the world. P2, C3, modus ponens.
That's a ridiculous claim.
Yeah, again, a rejection here because the focus on the word is a perfection, and this this is sort of like where a lot of the argument kind of comes from myself about what the author means by perfection.
Hold on, David. Did you accept P1 and P3?
Yeah, P1, P2, P3.
Right.
Yeah.
So, John, isn't that conclusion a modus tollens deduction?
Modus ponens.
For accepting P1 and P3?
Yeah.
Right, so you can't...
It follows from that.
If you're going to reject it, you've got to reject either P1 or P3 or both, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and being that you accepted P2 and being that you accepted C3, then by inference of modus ponens, that you would have to logically accept C4.
I see. You know what? So, I see.
I think you can summarize our argument as saying that God's morally perfect, God's perfect in every way, so anything he does is going to be perfect, including whatever he created. So whatever he created is going to be perfect.
Okay, so let me go to C5 and C6. We're almost done. C5 says, if God exists, then the actions of God has decreased the degree of moral perfection in the world. C2, C4, hypothetical syllogism. I would agree. Do you agree, Gavin and David?
No, not at all.
Okay, what about you, David?
I'm actually on this. Okay, I need to look at this again because I think that this is like trying to fall into some kind of as Haiti described, this is some kind of syllogism, hypothetical syllogism, and it's sort of designed to all fit together, right?
Correct.
So that if you accept the premises, then you have to accept the conclusions as a logical necessity. So again, if we have some contention here in the premise, then yeah, but the conclusion is something that I don't accept.
So I mean,
You don't like it.
so let me conclude this.
Okay, let me just add this real quick, and then
Because the understanding of go ahead.
So David, you could still reject the conclusion, even if you agree with the premises, because you may have a different understanding about the premises. So, in this particular case, it's not an automatic just because you say 1, 2, and 3 that you have to do 4. They have to demonstrate that 4 will logically follow and necessitate by you agreeing to 1, 2, and 3. So that's part of the confusion here. So if you don't believe that it follows, then you guys have to discuss the first 3 premises and see how you're seeing each one differently.
I mean, look. All I have to say is that the way the Bible describes reality is that it is what we would call not perfect, in the sense that God allows for a temporary measure of evil and a temporary.
I don't want it just to turn into like a long rambling. You need to say, I don't like this premise. Here's why, right? So just saying the Bible.
We'll get to that. No, we're just getting.
I don't like the idea of a morally perfect world, because what it means.
I was asking you for that. The premise is the world morally.
I don't like it.
No.
That's one of the premises, right? The world is morally imperfect, right? Yeah. And you accept that, right? So you don't need to do this, whatever you're doing.
Yeah, all I gotta say is that I don't like the idea of how they, the idea of morally perfect world. I don't like that idea.
I don't know what that means. You agree the world's morally imperfect, right?
Yeah, it
what is there not to like?
So the idea of perfection is something that I don't think is being translated here properly, because the reality that the Bible describes is one where evil has a degree of being allowed to exist, but is always in the end answered for, just as it says in the first covenant, which includes eye for an eye, life for a life, tooth for tooth. It was not canceled but fulfilled, and all things will be answered. So that means even the evil, which if you're keeping track of score of like evil and good as like, let's say, points, those will all evil will be answered completely. So I think from the sense of from God's perspective, right, which is timeless. We're beings in time, so we don't see it that way. But outside of time, it's been the evil is answered in perpetuity. So I think the idea for us when we talk about God, who is timeless, and we're talking about perfection, we're mixing something that's something that has to do with state and time, and we're mixing it in with someone who is timeless and sees creation from outside of time. So I think there's some implicit things going on here in those premises that deserve further discussion.
I think the whole thing could have been down to, I think the world is morally perfect.
Yeah, but the thing is, that was what he was saying, right? The world is morally perfect because you see there's some sort of end game where everything's going to be made right. Yes?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here's my problem with that. Is hell morally perfect?
It is, right?
What?
In the sense that
What?
Right, I don't judge it, but it is because it's the answer to
Is there moral perfection in hell? Or is sin? Does sin exist in hell?
What a red herring.
He says he doesn't judge hell. So it means he has no opinion on moral.
Randolph, hang on. He's saying that from his vantage point, hell is morally perfect because justice requires punishment. Therefore, the punishment being dished out in hell would be morally perfect.
Is there sin in hell? Is there evil in hell?
What a red herring. Can we move on, John?
I mean,
Set them meow, Gavin.
Right?
Look, I think you can't say the world is morally perfect if you think there's evil and sin in hell, which presumably there will always be, right? Yes, it's rejecting all the syllogisms, you moron. This is what we are talking about.
Thank you, Haiti. I appreciate your input. I really do. That's all I had to contribute as far as the discussion goes.
Well, just to be clear, David, I just want to take one. Can I just ask you one direct question, David? Do you think that a world where there's, before sans creation, where there was just God, is just as good as a world with rape and murder and sin?
The world that we have now is not good.
You just said
you're contradicting yourself. That's a blatant contradiction. We can move on now.
Jovan, you need to actually pay attention and follow.
We are following.
This whole Jovan coming in and
not being dishonest, man.
Honest and interact with somebody.
I wasn't being dishonest. You're being dishonest right now.
He's literally said, from his perspective, he's following and he's saying that it will be morally perfect when God completes this. He's not saying that right now everything is perfect or running the way it should be. So I'd like you to actually represent what he says and not what you pretend that he says, Jovan.
Right. So the problem is even when everything's been set to rights in the rapture and blah blah blah, right? There's still going to be hell, yes. And there's still going to be evil things happening in hell. There's still going to be evil people.
Let's talk about the syllogism.
Shut up. We are, idiot. David, you see the problem. David, you see the problem.
He's saying hell is a punishment.
Well, I think
in your punishment, you're not going to be able to be going out raping, murdering, and torturing people. You're going to be facing the punishment for that. He's saying that for perfection, there has to be consequence and judgment. And in this particular case, David is saying from his perspective that this will be morally perfect because people are getting the judgment that they deserve and other people are getting the justice they deserve.
Right. The judgment are not morally perfect, are they? They are presumably evil people who exist. So if evil people exist in a world, how can it be morally perfect without evil?
I got most of them fed, I think.
Do you see that now? Do you see that now, David?
I think they're still struggling.
I understand you have a moral.
I'm not him at all.
I understand more. Yeah, Heidi, I understand you have a moral objection to hell.
No, that's not what I said, sir.
That's what logical.
Okay, sorry.
I said that there are evil people in hell. Do you disagree?
Red herring.
Are there evil people in hell?
One mic, Gavin.
Are there evil people in hell? David, are there evil people in hell?
Yes,
Keep your pants on,
Jeffrey.
that's correct.
Yes. One mic,
Get
Gavin.
out of your playground, Jeffrey. Be quiet.
Gavin, shut your meow.
One mic, Gavin.
Gavin, keep your pants.
Be quiet, Jeffrey. Such a
One
mouth.
mic, Gavin.
David,
Be quiet, Jeffrey. Don't you really want to the
One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin.
out, Gavin.
One mic, Gavin.
The
Hold on, hold
world
it
is
up.
morally imperfect. This is the syllogism we're discussing. David, are there evil people in hell, and will there always be evil people in hell?
Yes, that's right.
Right, so then the world contains evil. Therefore, it can't be morally perfect. Right?
Boom.
Well, I don't know.
No, that doesn't follow. I don't know what crank you guys are smoking, but that just does not necessitate. They're being judged. They're getting the judgment.
So what?
In this particular case, other people are getting salvation.
Why would they get judgment if it's morally bad? What are you talking
So,
about?
James, are you
The
saying that it's
judgment
all
that they are
non-evil
getting-
people in hell?
Wow.
The judgment is morally perfect.
Yeah, but the people are not.
They are receiving.
People are not.
They're receiving morally perfect. It doesn't matter if you're an immoral person receiving judgment.
Look, the people are not perfect. Right?
Stop the word here. The syllogism says nothing about hell, so
One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin.
Let's go back.
One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin.
Gavin,
One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin. One mic, Gavin. One mic,
Can
Gavin.
we go back to syllogism?
Hey guys, can we mute? Yeah, thank you.
Look, David, I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, and if hell didn't exist, you might have a point, but hell is going to exist, presumably.
You guys
in your
haven't
theory.
proved
And
any
it's
of
going to
that. You
contain
keep asserting
evil. It's going to contain
keep
evil,
asserting
period.
Hell is not in the syllogism, Heidi. Let's go back to the syllogism and let's
Wouldn't
work through
heaven,
it.
Katie, wouldn't heaven just balance it out though? Because there's no evil in heaven. So wouldn't they just balance each other out under his view?
You guys just
No,
aren't
you
tracking.
can't say if there's half black balls and half white balls, it balances out.
I
There's
don't
all white balls, and if there's any black balls, it's not all white. It's not
I thought he was trying to say that they would be even, that they would even each other out.
No, he was just trying to say when all the wrongs are righted, right? He's talking about the rapture, the second coming, whatever, right? But the point is that would be fine, but there will still be people in hell being evil.
Yeah, we can affirm. Hey, we can just grant. We can just grant. Wait, Gavin, one second. We can just grant, right, that it is.
Okay, I muted everyone. Look, one person at a time. If you guys are talking about something, you have to demonstrate it. You have to actually explain it. You can't just assert, hey, theists, I don't like you or your God.
What?
There's a hell, therefore I'm right.
Doesn't that mean you have to demonstrate your God though? Your God claim. You have to demonstrate your God claim.
Wait, no, I didn't say anything like that.
You actually have to
I
put something forth.
demonstrated what I was saying. Here's
No,
the
you have not demonstrated. Talk over the mob. You haven't demonstrated anything. You keep asserting it. I've been waiting for a
You
demonstration.
want a syllogism, James?
The syllogism that's above doesn't follow.
No, you want a syllogism for my claim, because I'm happy to give that.
Yes, I want to see.
No,
you're asserting.
talking about the syllogism from Rob.
Oh, so I can't demonstrate my claim.
Gavin, hang on. She's making an objection that somehow the existence of atheists or anybody going to hell for their sins somehow necessitates that there is now something wrong in that situation, but they have not been able to demonstrate that. It's just assertions.
Happy to do it. Ready? Premise 1. In a morally perfect world, there would be no evil. Premise 2. Hell exists. Premise 3. There are evil people in hell. Conclusion. No. Premise 4. There is evil in the world because there are evil people in hell. Conclusion. The world is not morally perfect. Now,
I disagree with the first premise.
For a sec.
I disagree with the
specify. I said, Martin to specify that the people in hell came from the world.
Randolph, stop interrupting me. I'm so tired of you guys interrupting. Haiti said it. I was responding to it.
premise?
The first premise is flawed because I don't believe that in this particular world that it necessitates that people who are choosing not God can't be punished for choosing not God.
Wait, my first premise was, in a morally perfect world, evil wouldn't exist. Do you disagree with that?
Yes, I disagree with that.
Do you think in a morally perfect world, evil would exist?
Because your premise is flawed, because in a morally perfect world with free will where people are able to choose not God, there would be a punishment for choosing not God. I disagree with your first premise.
Right.
I don't think that that's the world that we live in.
Okay, so great. So what you're saying is, in a morally perfect world, evil exists, right? So what do you mean by morally perfect? Because
No, hey, if you you keep misrepresenting me, and I'm getting so tired of it. I'm just so frustrated with this, Haiti. I'm really, I'm trying my patience to not, get upset. But you guys continuously do it over and over and over. Okay, John, this is your room. Whatever you want to do, I cannot talk to these people being dishonest tonight.
James, can I steal manual?
I'm not being dishonest at all. I said...
Yeah, no, how about we get back to the syllogism that we're talking about?
You would be...
John Lee, let's get back to the syllogism.
These people are really going to have to say. These people have to deal with the cops right now, but
the cops? Wait, you had to deal with the cops?
Get pulled over?
None of your business. None of your business.
John,
Let's get on the syllogism. Let's get on the syllogism, John.
What were you doing?
I was talking to you guys.
None of your business. Be quiet.
That's all.
John, can you answer that? You're not the ruler of him, right?
Right, so...
This is the syllogism that I'm discussing with you guys. So
when James got here, I was literally on the last reading of it, and it was I would claim it doesn't even follow.
Which is the...
But yeah, and so he's claiming. Okay, so let me pull this up right here again. Sorry about the delay. Did James leave? I was actually glad. Just good timing.
No, he's just
another mod got here.
Who's here?
No, I'm here. I'm just not dealing with the dishonesty.
It was good timing.
I'm letting you do
He
it.
wasn't being dishonest.
Yeah, but
it's just this whole thing about
God does not
lying and
exist.
pretending is just not going to fly. Go ahead.
I can't wait when James stands before God and God looks at him and tells him he judged too much.
I wish these atheists could control themselves and be quiet.
So in any case, the conclusion 6 is God does not exist. It references C1, C5, negation, and introduction. That's what it says. Now, I would contend, well, I don't think there's a theist here that would agree with that conclusion, but more importantly, I think that it just simply doesn't follow from C1 and C5, and that would be one point I would make. But that's the end of it. I don't think I need to ask whether David or James or Gavin would agree with the conclusion, which is God exists. So I think we could start to
not at all. You can't agree with that conclusion. Can I justify why? Yeah, John, can I justify very quickly why premise 3 is wrong?
Just remind us of premise 3 again.
Yeah, and now what I said about the conclusion is that it doesn't follow from C1 and C5.
Premise 3 was the one where the world was morally perfect with just God. Sans creation.
I'll read it. Yeah, it's big in the question, I'll tell you why. So, it says, if God is a morally perfect being, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. That's a begging the Christian fallacy, because it's assuming that before God created, everything was perfect, correct?
Was God not perfect?
Answer my question.
Wait, Gavin, what's
was everything perfect?
Was God
Gavin?
Everything perfect since creation.
Gavin, what's
everything perfect? John, you can answer me.
With God?
Was everything perfect since creation?
Gavin, what's it?
Yes, Gavin. Yes, it was. Yes, it was, Gavin.
I do have a question for you, Gavin. What was there sans creation?
Yeah, what was co-eternal with God?
As far as the Bible tells us, the triune God was there. But I've got a question, and the question is this.
Right, and
the question is this. The question is this. If the world was already perfect before God created, how come Satan had fallen and taken a third of the angels with them.
Confusing the world with
That
the
was after
creation of the world.
creation. That was after creation.
God didn't create Satan. All there was God.
Oh, Satan fell after the creation? Are you sure?
Yes.
Does he think that Satan's eternal?
With God.
He created
We can easily clear this up. I asked you a simple question. Before creation, what was there? You said the triune God. You did not say Lucifer. You did not say angels. You did not say anything. You just said the triune God, right? And so I accept the answer as well. Okay?
Good.
And so being that there's only the triune God, according to you, right? The question is that world morally perfect?
Which is why I followed up with, did not Satan and a third of the angels fall from grace?
Who created Satan?
God created.
No, he created Satan. Is Satan co-eternal with God?
Well, Gavin, I thought you were a Christian, mate. What's
John, Bina, you're turning into the most...
What I asked you a very simple question. Before creation, what was there?
Yes.
And you said the triune God. I love that answer because I agree, right?
Yes.
But then all of a sudden, before creation, you're talking about creatures.
I'm asking. Yeah, I'm asking the question.
I don't believe there were creatures before creation. Does that make sense?
Is Satan co-eternal with God?
I'm asking the question, prior to God creation, had Satan and a third of the angels fallen?
I don't believe
God created the heavens.
This is before creation.
Where were the angels if God hadn't created the heavens yet? Where were they, mate?
So I'm still sticking to my guns that premise 3 is wrong because it's begging the question.
Oh my God, that's not begging the question.
Prior to God creating anything, and that includes Satan, was the world morally perfect?
It seems to me
the Bible doesn't say the world was morally perfect.
Does it say God's perfect? Does it say God's perfect?
The Bible doesn't say the world was morally perfect.
Hey,
He's equivocating world with...
Gavin, did anything exist before God created anything besides God?
According to the Bible, no.
Okay, so if there's only God, and God is perfectly good, then however God is existing, in whatever form that is, everything was perfect, because it was just God.
Rather than tell him something, why don't you just ask him, when there's only God, Gavin, before creation, was that world morally perfect?
Okay, I might be revising my answer here. If God is a morally perfect being, yes, agree with that, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. Yeah. So I'm going to have to revise my answer and agree with that. And I'm with you on that one, John.
He agrees with every premise and conclusion. Beautiful.
Well done, Gavin.
No, that's misrepresentative, Jovan. He did not agree. He disagreed with the third premise. Now, after some consideration, he revised his position to say he agrees with the third premise. That's where we're at. All the thieves are on the same page. For the first 3 premises, we agree on the first 3 premises. Now, you had actually said you agreed with the 4th premise, Gavin, but in light of your revision, you might want to consider the 4th premise because it seems David, and I don't know James's position, but we actually are objecting to the 4th premise.
Look at him trying to coach Gavin now. Like, Gavin, say no to this. Say no to this, Gavin.
I'm not trying to coach him on anything.
John, do you think it would be fruitful to move Jovan down?
Gavin, do you think it would be fruitful to claim that God is evil?
Wait a minute, you're not allowed to complain about other people on the stage, John. That was your rule.
That's correct.
Gavin's admitted that God is evil.
A lot of complaining from Daniel Nero and Jovan about me, John.
Dude, you said
I wouldn't exactly call it a complaint, but I mean, as far as even questioning anyone on stage, I'm not even going to tolerate that.
whether it's true or not.
Okay, so let's move on.
Yeah, until they no longer belong there.
Let's move on, shall we?
The document doesn't actually contain the distinction that we've been talking about, which is the everything before the physical creation, right, of the universe, space, time, matter, planets, right? But then we use the word world to refer to both in this document. In other words,
it means existence. World means existence, David. We already covered this. World means existence.
I just want to
Stop coming in and over talking.
I just want to say
physical existence is separate from the eternal
one
Father.
quick second, David. I just want to reference the video. It's new today. It is the Muslim metaphysician versus the King of Trolls, Jovan. A chronological order of the series of events.
Wait, who made the video?
Jake
actually made a video of it.
Yes, he made two, and this one's mine above.
Right, but just to clarify, David.
You misspelled it.
When they use the word world, though, they don't mean like, they don't use... when they use the word world, they don't mean like the universe or planet Earth, right? They just mean existence. So prior to creation, the only thing that existed was God, right? That's what they mean.
Yeah, but then they use the word world to refer to creation, which is, I mean.
Well, no, they don't.
It's just a
They don't. No, because they
say
it matters, right? Because we're talking about eternal.
No, you could just substitute existence for every time you see the word world. It would still work.
Human existence or
any existence. Any existence.
Okay, including spiritual existence, right? Which is God is a spirit.
Yep. Correct.
Okay.
Right, but the question is, what creates the heavens and the earth? Is that an additional world or something, some creation within?
Yeah, that's my point.
World.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, that's it. Right, because there's two separate.
I would contend that there is one world, and then there's an addition to that one world. That's how I would understand creation.
So you could just say there's no stuff in that world, right?
Yes.
First there's just a world where it's just God, and now there's a world that has heavens and earth and the devils and whatever. Right, so fine, it's still one world.
Okay, so being that at least David and I disagree with premise number 4, maybe you, Jovan, I think had pointed that you can start to defend and justify premise number 4. Are you willing to do that?
Well, state what premise 4 is, John.
Premise 4, I don't have it in the pin link anymore.
I've got it here if you want, I can read it out.
Maybe you could back channel me with something there. Let me see if I could find it on Chrome or something.
Just so you know, you spelled Jovan's name.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you do that on purpose?
That's what I said, yeah.
I'll look at rated it. Good at rating stuff.
All right. Okay, so premise 4 is if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. I object to that. David seems to object to that. I see that you're here.
I object to that.
Oh, you do object. Okay, very good. Because and this is
very good.
So, James and Johnny, if you want your position on that.
State the.
If you guys are even there.
Yeah, I'm there.
4 one more time, please. State it one more time for me, please, John. I've been in and out listening. I haven't been following. Are you saying a morally perfect God could not decrease the moral perfection of the world? Is that what the premise 4 is? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Johnny. Johnny, do you want me to send you the link to to what we're reading?
I can't look at it right now, but if you restate that again for me, please.
Okay, I'll read it. It's premise number 4. It says, if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world.
Okay. Well, if you're going to look at it in the sense that God put man in this world that is capable of sin, then if you're going to say because of sin there is a decrease in moral perfection, and if God is the one who created these beings capable of bringing sin into the world, which would conclude that the world is not morally perfect anymore, then I would say yes, there would be a decrease in that based on the creation itself. No? Is that nonsensical?
Yeah, no, we're on the same page. So with regard to the statement being made, so then would you be an acceptance that God cannot decrease the moral perfection of the world? Or would you disagree with that?
Well, I would say that he could, being that he placed...
There you go. So you disagree with it. I
guess I'm disagreeing.
So 4 theists object to premise number 4, and so it's unanimous, at least among the 4 theists on the stage. And so, Jovan, maybe you could provide an argument.
I haven't been listening, John, but I would like to say that look at what James put. Jovone.
I saw that.
My man can't even spell. My man literally can't read. My man can't read or spell. I love that you own this.
Red herring. You guys have got nothing.
Oh, Gavin,
let's move on, John.
Would you like to? Yeah, well, I'm actually asking Jovan if because I told him that once we went through it, that he could go, respond to it. And rather than beginning on premise 3, because Gavin revised it, 4 Christians, 4 theists are objecting to premise 4. Can you convince us with an argument to justify premise number 4, Jovan?
No, what was premise 4? I wasn't even paying.
Premise number 4 is God cannot decrease the moral perfection in the world.
It's going to be something along the lines of, if you're a morally perfect being, all your actions are going to be of utmost morally perfection. So any action you take is going to be the perfect action, so your actions can't ever increase any non-perfection into existence. Or you can't ever make an action that's not perfect.
Did you hear Johnny's reasoning why God can? I don't know if you were...
he just said perfection includes horrible stuff, right?
Right.
Well, John, I'm back, and I waited for a call.
Well, then you're just going to have to...
come now.
You're just going to have to say...
Maybe Rob could justify...
I'm just going to make this last statement. Yeah, I'm going to make this last statement, and then we'll just take over. You're just going to have to say that one of the great making properties is something rape, torture, suffering, evil, something along those lines then. Good luck with that.
Well, I don't have a problem with that at all, in the sense of justifying a good God. A perfectly good
God. John doesn't have a problem with rape being a great making property. Well, you can write that one down.
Yeah, you tried to get a soundbite from Jake yesterday. You're coming to the wrong person if you think you can't get a soundbite from them.
So if Rob's going to take over, we're up to premise 4. We've got 4 theists who are in agreement that premise 4 is wrong, Rob. So do you want to try and justify premise 4?
Yeah, sure. So if we take God to be maximally powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, perfectly rational, he's an agent and personal, and you agree that creation is a free gift. That is, that creation, God did not have to create. He could have not created, and everything would have remained perfect. Then it follows from that if he created knowing that something in his creation would bring about a state of moral imperfection, then that wouldn't be permitted. The only way you could justify P4 is by saying that God necessarily had to create, and he had to create in this way, but then you would be saying that you're appealing to necessitarianism, as I understand it. Now, if you don't appeal to necessitarianism, then what I've said follows.
Yeah, I disagree with a couple things you said, but in regards to necessitarianism, I actually do subscribe to some necessitarian views in the example of what I was talking about earlier regarding God's will. God cannot do anything else outside of his will to do. Now, when you mentioned God could have created, he could have not created the world, that's why I disagree with that, because that was never in his will to not create the world. So because that was never in his will, he therefore could not do it.
All right, so let me just respond to you there, Johnny, if I may, because this would seem problematic to me. Is his will and his nature, are they in perfect alignment?
Yes.
And is his nature one of moral perfection?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, but then you're saying that his will conflicts with his nature because his will is to create a state of affairs with moral imperfection.
Doesn't conflict with his nature.
But isn't his nature morally perfect?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but then his will is not morally perfect because you're saying that he willed a state of affairs with moral imperfection, and he did not well, in your case you're saying he does have to, but the further implication is that he's then contingent on creation. Let me just ask you something, Johnny. Is God the greatest conceivable being?
Yes, but let me make a statement based on what you said. Yes, God is morally perfect because that flows from his nature. His will is also morally perfect. However, just because he created creatures that are not morally perfect does not mean God's will to create them is therefore not morally perfect.
Okay, and you're saying that the greatest conceivable being is contingent on creating immoral beings. Is that the idea?
No, he's not saying that.
I don't know about the language you're using regarding. Yeah, I don't know about the language you're regarding in contingent. I just look at it in sort of the necessitarianistic fashion, that because God had a will to create this world, which also consists of creatures that are morally imperfect, I still see that will as a perfect will. And because God has a will to create, it is then necessary that the world coming into being follows from his will. That portion is necessary.
So let me understand something. Do you understand will to be like something where God can deliberate between different options, or do you understand will to be like a disposition, like a mechanistic state? Where it just follows and there's no deliberation that can take place?
Yeah, there is no deliberation. I do not believe God is in eternity past opening up a catalog of ideas, of worldviews, to then determine which one is the best. I don't see it like that.
Okay, but you're saying, so let me just understand you, John. You're saying he's given, do you agree that free will, do you think we have free will, by the way?
I explained it earlier. I mean, what a lot of people consider free.
Okay.
That's okay. A lot of people consider free will in the sort of libertarian sense, which I do not. But yes, creatures are free to do that which they will to do, which is evil. Of course, we see that in the world. So creatures are willfully committing evil. So if that's what you're going to mean by free will, yeah, you have that freedom to do what you will to do, in which we see the example of that manifesting in this world.
And is that a virtue, Johnny?
I guess. I mean, when you ask, is it a virtue to have free will?
To have freedom, is that a virtue?
Sure. Why not?
Okay, but you're agreeing that God does not have that freedom. He necessarily has to follow a certain state of affairs given his will or his thing. So God has something, missing something that humans have. Right? He doesn't have the freedom that humans have.
Johnny is not saying that.
Hold on, let me finish. The thing is, you have the same thing, Rob, in regards to what is your will? What is man's will? Man's will is to do evil, and man does evil freely. You can't do anything outside of your nature. You can't do anything against your will. You're going to do everything that is in proportion to what you have a will to do, your desire, so to speak. You can't do anything that you don't have a will to do.
So what do you mean by freedom there? Because it seems to be entirely opaque. It seems to me that freedom just, in your view, cashes out as something like it's dispositional. That is, it's just like mechanistic. There isn't a deliberation that we could choose one thing or another.
It's compatibilism. There's a man you're equivocating. It's compatibilism, that's what it is.
Okay.
Are you free to sin? Yes, you are.
Are you free not to sin?
You're able to exercise.
Can we just have Rob and Johnny, please? Thank you.
Are you free not to sin, Johnny?
No, because that is not part of my nature.
Okay, then you're equivocating on freedom. Then there is no freedom in your view.
Well, but I don't have a will to. That's the thing that you're still missing. Does the creature, does mankind, the natural man, so to speak, does the natural man have a will to not sin? No.
Okay, so then will just means that men, dispositionally, they are mechanistic. It's like a robot. You program a robot to do various tasks. The robot can't do anything else. It's going to do those tasks and those tasks only. So God programmed us. This is the implication of what you're saying, to sin. And the question, and you're saying to me that it's impossible for God not to create, and not to create as he has done with dispositional creatures that sin. And you want to say that he's the greatest conceivable being and still morally perfect. Then I think we're just at an impasse there, Johnny, because I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say that you are equivocating on moral perfection.
I don't think so. You're also looking at it in the form of a robot. For example, a robot does not have any volition of its own. It's not doing anything based on its own desires. It's only doing something that I desire it to do. As with the man is doing things based on his desires. Like, for example, it wasn't that Hitler was doing his evil against Hitler's will to do. No, Hitler did have a will and a desire to do evil. He wasn't forced to order the slaughter of 6 million Jews against his will.
Johnny, when you say that God determined his will,
that's
his desires?
Hold on a second. That is the difference between the free agency in man versus the robotic.
And they keep using the word free again.
Person that
like compatibilism, God determines our desires and our will, correct? Is supposed to be one mic between John and Rob? Isn't there supposed to be one mic between John and Rob? Gavin, you're not moderating, are you?
I think Rob said they're at an impasse. So
Is there supposed to be one mic between Johnny and Rob?
Rob, are you
one
done?
mic to rule them all.
Rob, are you done?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm hearing equivocation on Johnny's part by my lights. So obviously, I'm just going to reject what I hear to be morally perfect or free will or whatever, or some version of freedom. I understand that not to be morally perfect, and in fact, it's mechanistic or dispositional. And maybe those words. Well, maybe I can use some of those words. So I think those words
fails. Rob, I can tell you very clearly why your premise 4 fails. You have to listen carefully, okay? Your premise 4 fails because human cruelty and suffering happens because God does not intervene to prevent humans exercising their free will. If he was to do so, would be to deprive human beings of the very choice that makes them human.
Good God, we're going over this. God does intervene. The Bible, there's plenty of examples in the Bible where he intervenes. So that fails. We're already going over this. So your free will defense fails.
No. Stop your muttering. God intervenes.
Rob, real quick, Gavin. Let me finish with Rob real quick.
Sure.
When you said I was equivocating, I'm just, what are you suggesting I'm being unclear on?
So what you're equivocating on is moral perfection and freedom. When you use those words, what you actually mean is, and the word will, I understand will to be something where you can deliberate between different options. Under your view, that's not the case. So when you use will, freedom, or moral perfection, you're using them in a completely different way to both myself and most other people. So by my lights, you're equivocating when you use those words. So hence, obviously, you can reject, and this, of course, I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose, Johnny, but this is one way to avoid this argument, is to equivocate on certain words. And that's what I believe you're doing.
I mean, the creature can deliberate. I mean, You can choose, no, not God, but you can choose what you're going to do. But my point is, regardless of whatever you're choosing to do or whatever you're deliberating on doing, it's still flowing from your sinful nature.
All you're saying there is that all you're saying is my actions follow one from another in a mechanistic type way. I can't actually affect my actions. That's what you're actually saying, because otherwise I could deliberate, and instead of choosing only sin, I could choose not to sin, and you say that's not possible.
It's not possible.
It's just
that's not in your. Well, but it's not in
there you go.
To do.
All you're saying is it's not my programming, right? Like a robot. If I program a robot to turn right, it's not possible for the robot to turn left. And when you say, look, Johnny, when you say, hey, the robot had a choice, or you're misusing the word choice. I understand a choice for a robot to turn left or right. If the robot is programmed only to turn right, the robot has no choice. Similarly, if our disposition is only to sin, then we don't have a choice not to sin.
You're always going to choose our greatest desire. God determines our greatest desire. So it's determinism.
It depends on how you understand choice. I understand choice, definitionally speaking, is on one. There's several definitions, of course, but one of the definitions is preference. So you prefer X over Y, whatever. So regardless, like for example, I've given this analogy before too, even if I go into a restaurant where there's a buffet, you have pancakes and sausage and whatever. Let's say my ultimate desire is to have, an omelet. I don't really care if there are gravy and biscuits there. I'm going to choose an omelet because that is what I desire. I'm sorry. I'm going to choose an omelet because that's what I desire. But the problem is, I think that it's still being missed, is whatever you choose, at least according to how God sees it, whatever you choose, because Scripture teaches that even our good deeds are like filthy rags. But for the natural man, he has a will, and that flows from his corrupt nature. So everything you choose to do will be influenced by your nature. You can't do otherwise. That's what libertarian free will suggests. This is why I disagree with libertarian free will, because it suggests that you can do things and make decisions that is not influenced by your nature. And to me, that doesn't make sense.
So can we just go back to God for a second? You're saying that he couldn't have not created because it was his will to create.
Correct.
But why couldn't he have changed his will?
I don't know. I mean, when you say why couldn't he have changed his will?
God is immutable, Haiti.
Yeah, he doesn't. God is unchanging. But as far as his will goes, I would just simply say God had a will to create this universe. So when someone asks me, could God have created an alternative universe comparable to what we see now? No. The reason why, God didn't have a will to create that universe.
Yeah, that's just like trivially true, right? He did it because he wanted to, right? But the question is, could he have chosen not to create?
No.
And I don't see why not, given he's presumably omnipotent, right? He can do whatever he wants, or at the very least, everything that's logically possible, right?
He did do.
No. He could do anything he wants, right?
He did.
Yeah, but just saying he did is not informative, right? Obviously he did. But the question is, could he have done something else?
He didn't want to do anything else.
But why not?
Who determined his will?
Not this,
Wait.
this world.
Who determined
this is
his
the best
will?
world.
He didn't choose his will?
Yep, but if you say it that way, I can accept it. Now, what's the
will come from?
Pondering, I don't. What comes from his essence, who he is. I don't look at God as pondering ideas here.
Right, yeah, I know, but that doesn't really help because it just seems like God's existed eternally and he's always just had a will to create, but we don't know why. He didn't choose between creation and not creation, right?
For his own glory.
Why not?
For his glory. That's what Scripture teaches.
Come on, that's not an answer. You know that as well as I do.
That's what
So
Scripture teaches.
if God
that he created, hold on, James.
Yeah.
Talks about how he created for his own pleasure and his own glory, and his own purposes. But Haiti, if I say that I can do anything I want, someone would say, well, how come you're not out there murdering people? Because that's not what I want to do.
Yeah,
And
that's
this is the
fine,
same
but
thing with God. God didn't create some other alternative universe because that's not what he wanted.
and we're still talking about creation versus not creation, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about alternate worlds. And it just doesn't make any sense that he just was like born, not that he was born, right? I guess he was eternal. But he was just eternally there with that will to create.
Because our will was determined by God.
Right? He wasn't able to deliberate and say, if I create, this is what's going to happen. If I don't, this is what's going to happen. He wasn't able to do that.
I don't really understand why this is difficult, to be honest with you.
Well, then that's my question. Why couldn't he have done that? What was the problem? What's the
Because it wasn't his will to do it. That's
no, that's just that you're just backfilling because that's what you did.
I can't answer it any other way, Haiti.
I don't think you can answer it at all.
Well, okay, fine, but I'm just saying the reason why God doesn't do X is because he didn't have a will to do X. It's that simple for me.
Well, if it has been said that God does not deliberate,
choices, and if he's not deliberating between choices, then I don't even see how he's an agent.
Agency just means he has it's having the power to act. He is the producer of an effect.
My Rumba has
an agent.
No, that's not agency, though, Johnny.
Yeah, according to the definition.
Agency is the ability to deliberate.
According to the definition, it is.
So Johnny, if God does not deliberate, how did the flood get decided to happen?
Look,
he's already answered that. He said he's right.
Really, can we get back to the story?
But Johnny's whole view is that everything happens by... Okay.
John believes God did have the choice to not create, right, John?
No, because it was not in his will to do.
You're Johnny, right? John...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that was a bit sassy. But John believes that God did have the choice to create or not create. And you're saying he doesn't have the choice. And I just think entities that just act and don't deliberate between options, I don't see how they're agents.
Well, let John respond to that.
Yeah.
Hey, Haiti, let me ask you a question, or Johnny. Can a perfect God create
Wait, hold on a second. Let John respond to that.
The way I look at it, God is free to choose to create or not.
Right.
However, once having decided to create, it can only be created according to his nature and so forth. And so there has to be things that it must include.
Yeah, that's not the question, though. The question was...
Well, it is important because evil is one of those things.
Yeah, but Johnny's saying he didn't have the choice not to create. And, why do you think he thinks that?
Why? Because he stated earlier he's a necessitarian.
Right, okay, but that's just repeating what he believes. Yeah, he's a necessitarian. But, why do you think he's wrong?
Because I think if you make it out that God is necessarily needs to create, and then there's it would make him out to be a sort of a mechanism, and God is not.
All right, that's what we're saying. Well, thanks, John. David.
Yeah, well, I just simply disagree with it. Let me respond to that, please, real quick, and then David can go. Saying that God could have chosen to have not created, you're also going to have to say could someone please mute that? You're also going to have to say not choosing would be a will. God has then a will to not create. I don't see it as such that God would have both a will to not create and a will to create, but he just deliberated and decided to create. No, God has one will, and that will is to create. God never, in my estimation, God never had a will to not create, which is why God could not create.
Johnny, if that's the case, why did he create simultaneously in the beginning of time rather than another time? Because now you're saying the world just happens randomly? In this whole thing with your will, it's just awful.
Talking about well, it's not awful. Look, I don't understand what's illogical about this, at least theologically speaking. I don't see why this is unbiblical. I don't see why this is not in keeping with the theological view of God and his his person and who he is and his character and his will and his essence and all of these things. Just simply saying to me, oh, that's awful. Well, show me where it's awful according to the biblical description of who this God really is. I'm not interested so much in some atheist personal opinion of what they think makes sense or not. I'm not really interested in that.
This is just a separate point while you were talking that came to me, which is what explains why God created, if it's necessary for God to create, what explains why he chose to create at that moment and not a moment before that?
I don't know.
There you go. But not only that,
moments in time. You're looking at time here. Look, it's like suggesting to say that God existed for, quadrillions of years before he created the universe. I don't look at it like that. So when you say, why didn't God create it at another time? I think that's where there's going to be some confusion, because what God is prior to the creation of the world is not existing in time. Time began with the creation of the universe. I mean, even Einstein stated that matter is relative to time. So I just when you're trying to explain God in this sort of time frame that you're talking about, it's I just don't think it's going to.
But didn't you agree as well with the idea that at some point, I'm going to use that language rather, there was no creation, and that at another point there was creation? What do you call that?
I mean, that's actually that is a good question. What do we call that? I mean, God was present prior to the universe because Scripture teaches God is eternal. Well, of course, he was present. And when we use language in regards to at this particular point, I mean, we're trying to explain something in a way that humans can understand. It's difficult to do that when we're trying to understand an eternal God. We don't understand eternity because we ourselves were created. So it's going to be difficult, but I think the type of terminology that we're using is not going to be, I think, ultimately definitional in its perfection. I think we're just using that in a way that humans can try to understand an eternal God. That's the best I can do.
Well, look, humans do seem to have some understanding of eternal. Right, a beginningless series of events, or some notion like that. There might be other ideas, but there was a point where God was on its own, for want of a better word, and another point when creation came into existence. And those 2 points are not simultaneous, are they?
Yeah, but can you really understand eternal? I mean, even though I believe in heaven, those that are in heaven will be there forever. But how do I imagine what forever is?
That's not difficult. From this moment, it's a series of events with no ending. That's what forever means, as I understand it. Living in heaven.
Imagine what that's like. I can't.
Well, all we're saying is there's a series of events that has no end. The other option is there's a beginningless series of events. You don't have to imagine it. The idea of imagining it, but as long as we can say it intelligibly and there's no contradiction, what's the problem?
I know what it is descriptively. That's not my point. Can you imagine existing forever with no end?
It doesn't
yes,
matter.
I can imagine that. Yes, I can imagine that, Johnny. But that's the imagination part isn't relevant. Let me give you the three problems and then I'm going to keep quiet.
We're getting like a little bit of feedback from Johnny. Johnny, could you mute, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. I wanted to say something, but...
There's three quick things and then I'll be quiet. In regards to your necessitarianism, it's one, you can't explain why God created at that point and not some other point. Number two, it makes God into a mechanism, like a mechanistic, dispositional and not an agent. And number three, it seems like God is contingent on, that God requires creation. Absent creation, God isn't fully God. So those are the three objections I have to your position.
Well, I don't agree with the way you explained that, though. Now, what I will agree with when you're regarding why did he create the universe at that point and not some other point, there I don't have an answer for it. I don't know. I don't know why God created it at that point and not some other point, as if to suggest that is even possible. I think in my particular case, I would argue that it's not possible, but nonetheless, I'm not sure I could give a sophisticated answer to that. But in regards to the mechanism and the necessitarianism, in the necessitarianistic explanation of it. The world is going to come into existence because that is what God willed it to do. There is no other will. There's no will to not create. It doesn't exist.
That's what I wanted to address, Johnny. I wanted to read Ephesians 1:11, right? It says, "In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his own will," right? And you may have heard that verse before. But the important thing I want you to consider is purpose. Do you think a mechanism has a sort of a purpose or a plan?
Yeah,
or agency
the creator
in
of
terms
the
of will?
mechanism, perhaps, but that's why I don't really like that language, mechanism.
That doesn't really apply to John. John, can I jump in real quick? This question is for Rob. Like, when you say that God is perfect, do you realize that part of his perfection is long suffering and patience, meaning that implicit with this his perfection, that he is long suffering. So we have to ask ourselves, what is he long suffering towards, and what is he patient about?
What do you mean long suffering? What does that mean, please?
So, meaning that God, he suffers the evil of man's actions, but he.
Do you mean that he has some emotional state that is negative for a period of time due to man acting in a way that's out of the core of his nature? Is that what you mean?
Exactly. That's exactly. In fact, the Bible says that he does get angry, and right, but he does not, right. Just like the people of Israel, he does not cut them off upon the first, even second, or even third provocation, but he gives them a space, right, an opportunity for repentance, right. So in other words, even though he has all the foreknowledge of good or bad, he doesn't deal with them. He doesn't deal with us, right, but according to the nature and reason of how we do things. In other words, as we interpret and how we handle it, he doesn't just cut us off, right? So he may know, since he has perfect foreknowledge, he may know all that, but he doesn't act accordingly with that. That's why he is. His perfection is long suffering.
David, let me just ask you something. What do you understand the word perfect to mean? What is your definition of perfect, please?
Perfect means many things. I would say that perfect is embodied by all the traits of God, which and as we know, the Bible describes them as being the fruits of the Spirit. Because
that doesn't tell me anything. Let me help you, David.
No, that is
you tell me if you agree, because that's okay. Uninformative. I understand perfect to be not improvable. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I would.
If I say you are the perfect person, that means you can't improve. You cannot be any better in any particular aspect. Not improvable is what I understand perfect to be. Do you agree or disagree?
Like a perfect circle?
Yes, it cannot be improved upon. It's not. It's in other words, that line that goes there is round in such a way that it cannot be improved upon. That's what I understand perfect to mean. Do you agree with that?
I would agree
or not?
Yeah, I think that's fine, because God wants us. There's a final image for us, right, which is to be conformed to his image.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, but here's the problem for you, David. Then I'm going to ask you, if you say that suffering is part of his perfect nature, then I'm going to ask you, is it the case that his perfect nature, by your standard, he ought to have suffered for eternity or only for a period of time, given that suffering is, by your lights, a perfect attribute?
Suffering does not entail, long suffering doesn't mean that he wants to suffer, but that he will suffer. He will endure suffering, right? It doesn't mean he wants to endure suffering. They're separate ideas. Right.
Okay, you're not understanding the problem here, David. You are saying that suffering is part of his perfect nature. So let me ask you something, David. If it's the case that you include suffering as part of his perfection, if he suffers for, let's say, 10,000 years, or he suffered for 1,000,000 years, which of those two would be, in inverted commas, more perfect?
I mean, that's not ours to say, right? I don't understand. I'm sorry. I'm not understanding this.
Look,
I don't mean to be
perfection. is not improvable. Now, if it's the case that suffering is part of his perfection, then it would follow that he would have to suffer in some way that is not improvable. And if he only suffered for a finite period of time, then we can understand suffering to be improvable. That is, he could have suffered longer if it's part of his perfection. All I'm trying to show you is that suffering will never work for you as a moral perfection. You have to keep us in the idea that he can suffer.
Okay.
Unless you're going to say that it's moral perfection and he suffered eternally.
Okay, so long-suffering only applies in the context of his creation. In other words, for as long as his creation is around, the long-suffering, in other words, long-suffering is a relational quality. So it doesn't exist. If creation at some point in time, right, in man's current state, in his fallen nature, only exists for a finite period of time, then that long-suffering is only going to be existing for a certain period of time.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, right. So he's only going to suffer for a period of time. When he's suffering, is he perfect as a being? By your standard?
Yeah.
Okay, when he didn't suffer, was he perfect as a being?
That's right.
Then you're contradicting yourself.
I'm not coming. Okay.
Yes, you are, because you say he's perfect when he doesn't suffer, and you say he's perfect when he does suffer. That's a contradiction.
Rob, you have to tell him why you believe that God has to be doing all actions always at once.
No, I don't do that. All I have to point out is contradictions.
Rob, stop interrupting me.
Why are you interrupting me with him, though?
Okay, down to the audience with Rob. I just wanted to add one point, Rob, and you won't, not interrupt. I just jumped in for a second. I've been quiet for a really long time, Rob. In this particular occasion, you have to explain to him why you believe God has to be doing everything always at once. A Christian does not believe that God is always applying his power and force at maximum. Now, I hope you understand that, Rob, and you can come back up only if you're going to be respectful now. If not, stay in the audience.
Right. I would, right, because he's not long suffering against, those, against Moses, right? He's not long suffering against Abraham, right? That period is over, right? There's nothing right? He's in communion with him. So that element is over. Long suffering is related to sinners and his creation in its fallen state.
Yeah, I would like to. Let me say this real quick, if I may. There are some things in these type of arguments and even theological type of responses that I think are just simply irrelevant. Like, for example, if someone says, well, God could have done X, Y, or Z. The question is, was God ever going to do X, Y, or Z? And if the answer is no, he was never, ever going to do X, Y, or Z, it then becomes irrelevant, at least for me, to argue, well, he could have done X, Y, or Z. Well, that's irrelevant. He was never going to do it.
Well, but look, we hold people accountable, right? If someone kills someone, we don't say, oh, well, you were always going to do it, so you had no choice, right? We say you could have not killed that person, and because of that, we're sending you to jail, right? So that's why it's relevant.
No, you're talking about power, and I think I remember, John can correct me if I'm wrong, when we were talking about the Valde shooting, I think we were looking at it in the sense of, God's plan and all of these things, that after we understand the end state of affair, which in this case, the end state of affair was this individual did shoot these children. Now, could he have left the gun on the shelf? Well, yeah, he had the power to do that. But once we see that he did it, I think John even answered, it was the point of that he was never not going to shoot these people. So even though there is a power, as I mentioned earlier before today, Haiti, there is a difference between power and will. And once we have the end state of affairs, we know what happened, like looking back in hindsight. Once you understand hindsight, you will also understand that it was never going to be another way.
Yeah, so you're saying there was a point at which the shooter could have
done otherwise? Could have decided, or something could have happened,
Not in
and he could have done
hindsight.
otherwise.
Not that we.
Well,
now that
then why do we send him to jail if he had no choice?
Well, because
right?
murder is illegal, and that's what we do. We punish murderers.
Well, I know that's what we do, but that's not really. I mean, who cares?
But my point is, Haiti, once we understand what the shooter did do, looking at the grand scheme, this is for Christians perhaps. Once we understand the grand scheme, Christians will understand that this individual shooting these children was part of God's plan. And because it was part of God's plan, there is never a case where he did not shoot these children.
Yeah, obviously he shot them. But the thing is, on your view, he could have not shot them, right?
Based on power.
So he's got more power than God?
No. Haiti, I explained this earlier today. I have power to do things, physical power, to overtake an old lady and steal her purse. I have that power. And I also have the power to just keep my hands to myself. I have that power. But in regards to the will, the reason why I'm not robbing old ladies is because I don't have a will to do it. But once we understand what has happened, as a Christian who believes God is sovereign, we understand it was never going to be another way.
Yeah, once it happened. But we're talking about before it happened. Before it happened, the shooter could have decided not to do it. But you're saying yes to that.
Well, but we would say that it's a possibility because we don't know the future.
Right. So before it happened, hello, still talking. Before it happened, the shooter could have decided to do something differently. But you're not giving that to God. You're saying before creation happened, God could not have chosen to do something differently. So you're like making God weaker than the shooter. The shooter had more options than God.
God has the power. He did not have the will to create any other universe than the one you're living in, Haiti. In other words,
I'm still talking about not creation, not other universe.
Same thing. He did not have a will to not create.
So, but the shooter could have changed his will. No?
Not now. Not that I realize what has happened.
Not once he decided.
Looking in hindsight, no, there was not going to be another way because the shooter shooting these kids was actually part of God's plan.
I forget God's plan. I'm just saying, you think the shooter could have chosen at some point not to do this? But God could not have chosen
not that I understand the end state of affairs, no. Now, what are you going to do tomorrow, Haiti? I could say, well, it's possible that Haiti would get up and have coffee, or it's possible that she would get up and have orange juice. See, I don't know the future. Mm-hmm. But once you get up and have coffee, and the next day you talk to me, I would say that was part of God's plan, and you were never going to do anything else.
Right. So I can choose right now between, I don't know, going to the library and going to the beach, right? I'm sitting here thinking about it. Why can't God decide to create and not create? Sorry, create or not create. If a pathetic agent, like a fallible human, can sit here and decide beach or library, you're saying the most omnipotent thing, the maximally greatest being, can't sit there and decide create or not create.
Well, but Haiti, you are also not going to do things that you don't have a will to do.
I'm going to deliberate.
You're also going to be able. Well, fine.
I'm going to weigh my options.
Okay, fine. But either way, whatever option you decide, it is what you have desired to do the most, and that is your will.
Yeah.
Does Haiti know that she will have... I mean, does God know that Haiti will drink coffee tomorrow?
Yes.
So God knows... So then Haiti can't do anything other than have coffee.
That's correct. If it's the plan for her to drink coffee...
Right. Okay.
Then she's not going to drink orange juice. That's correct.
Right. Okay. Well, then it seems like that Haiti doesn't have a choice.
It's just
she has
illusion, right?
She has a preference.
It's an illusion of a choice.
If you define choice as preference, of which that is one definition of choice, then yes, we do have choices per that definition.
If the God knew that the shooter was going to do the shooting,
I don't see how he could have done otherwise, because then God would have been wrong in his prediction.
Well, the shooter didn't have a will to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So he couldn't have done otherwise.
Not if he didn't have a will to do otherwise.
Could he have changed his will? Could he have changed his will?
Whatever the will is, you're going to come to a final state. There's going to be an execution of the will. And whatever that will is that we see now, in this case it's shooting these children, then that's what he was going to do. He could not have done otherwise because he just did not have that will.
So he could have had a different will, but he didn't, right?
Now that we know what he did, no, he could not have a different will. Now, if you were talking to me prior to the event, then it would be a different sort of conversation. But once we understand what has happened, I can then say it was never going to be another way.
Oh, that's cool. So we can just get in our time machine, right? Go back to, go and visit God prior to creation. He hasn't done it yet, right? So he could have chosen differently.
No, he could not have.
That's only because you know he did it. But what if we didn't know? What if we go back in
Well,
time
you're
and we
asking
lose our
something that's impossible, Katie. We can't do that.
Oh, okay. Well, God forbid we believe impossible things, right?
Well, that's not my shtick. I don't entertain that stuff.
No, I know. You only believe in real things, but okay, we can move on. I have to say,
does it not make sense, at least from the Christian worldview?
Well, I mean, I don't think the Christian worldview makes sense, but I will admit, I think, or concede, you've been very good today. I think this might be one of the few times you've actually engaged in this stuff, rather than just being like, I don't want to talk about this stuff, and I thought it was a really good room, so kudos.
Well, look, I've said this before too, Haiti. I don't mind answering questions.
Dude.
I don't mind having conversations, but when I start to shut down is when people come in and try to argue with me, try to play gotcha games. They've got their own little agenda that I can see a mile away. I'm not interested in that stuff.
Yeah, look, you've been debating all day, okay? It's just that it wasn't like shouty, but people have been arguing with you. This is not just you answering questions and us going, oh, okay, thanks for the answer, right?
Well,
you have been debating,
explanation.
and you did a nice job. That's what I'm saying.
Well, here's something that, I appreciate that, Haiti. Here's something that perhaps others can glean from this. If you want to approach Johnny, this is the way you do it. That's all I'm saying.
I just think you're in a good mood today. Did something happen? Did you have a good time last night or something?
Well, my wife, let's not get into that.
Johnny decided that today he would be a good cop and I would be
a good cop.
So when Rob or somebody gets rude, I just shut them down. No issue. Just poof, you're down to the audience, Rob.
No, what I wanted to do, everyone has really blasted Gavin and John Lee and James and maybe even Matt to a degree. I just wanted to outshine the rest and put on a facade to show that I can be not.
Good job. You did, Johnny. But this discussion is not over yet because we're still on premise 4.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Johnny, good.
Yeah, we're still on premise 4.
Well,
Can we carry on, John? John Lee.
John's gone. Oh, no, John's there, sorry. John, are you still with us? Premise 4 is...
carry on with the syllogism, John?
So premise 4 is a morally perfect God could not do anything to decrease the amount of moral perfection in the world, yeah.
I mean, you can go forward, unless you needed John to go forward with you, Gavin. I mean, if you wanted to...
Well, John and I were... John, it was me, John, David. Who's the fourth guy? There's four theists going through the syllogism.
I guess me?
Yeah, okay. So I think we all agreed that premise 4 was wrong. If God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. So,
did you say that? Why is it wrong?
Because human cruelty and suffering is something that God doesn't intervene to prevent, because that would prevent humans from exercising their free will.
Well, but that's exactly almost what Johnny was going through. That, I mean, God engages in activities that, like, that are all-powerful, all-knowing. So in terms of suffering, God, you're saying that God allows humans, that humans have free will, and God wants humans to have free will, and as such, he allows pain and suffering to occur in the world.
Yeah, I noticed the way you carefully worded that, but I'll restate it to how it actually is in the real world. God has created human beings with the ability to choose otherwise. God does not intervene to prevent humans from exercising their free will. Because if he did that, then he'd be depriving human beings of the choice that makes them human. And this is why premise 4 is wrong.
Well, I mean, Johnny himself just was saying, like, as an example, with Haiti drinking the coffee. God knows that Haiti's going to drink the coffee tomorrow. So God has knowledge of the future. God knows what you're going to do. God knows what your choices are going to be. So to say that God wants to give you free will, and as such, he's allowing pain and suffering to occur so you can have that choice, even though God knows what you're going to do and knows that Haiti's going to drink the coffee tomorrow, so therefore it's an illusion of a choice, seems to be contradictory to this issue of pain and suffering being required to engage in free will.
It's not contradictory at all. I'll ask you this question then. Is God's exhaustive foreknowledge, his absolute exhaustive foreknowledge, does it necessitate that it's causal?
No.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be, though.
Well done.
No, it doesn't have to be. Look, if I was told that, like, any child you have will definitely be a serial killer, right, and I just go ahead and have those children, then I have created evil, right, in that sense. And that's basically what God did with his creation.
No, that's not what he did.
So just to follow, Haiti, are you saying that you would smother baby Hitler in the crib?
No, that wasn't the analogy, right? Because it's not hang on. I'll tell you why it's not analogous, because this is before anything's even been created, right? This is the decision point, not after creation. So it's not that you give birth to a serial killer and then you're like, oh, I should probably kill them. No, the idea is you have the choice to have those babies or not prior to even getting pregnant, right? And if you were given absolute knowledge that they were going to be serial killers, it would be evil to bring them into the world, right?
So let's say,
and that's the analogy to what God did.
So let's say that in this analogy for you, you find out after having your kids that the one is going to be the next Charlie Manson and call himself Hitler Jr. Now that you're aware of that, what do you do with your son?
I mean, I can answer that, but I just want you to realize that that's a completely different question, right? Because I'm talking about prior to creation. Well, then, what's the response to it? Because all you're doing is changing the...
case, it's prior. No, it's still prior. It still works because it's still prior to the events. And in the case of God creating you, he's creating you prior to you doing the events. In the same way, you have your kid. He's in front of you. You have control of him prior to him murdering people. Well, it still fits.
No, it doesn't fit because I don't think that was saying the right thing to do would be God to destroy the world, right? In the same way that it's not right to kill a baby, even if you know they're going to grow up to evil. The right thing to do is not have the baby at all.
And doesn't God have the ability to, like, make it so the baby is not going to be a serial killer or a murderer? Like, well, God created something. He has the ability to make that happen.
No, even if we're saying foreknowledge is not causation, just the fact that he knew the outcome gives him the moral culpability. Just like me knowing the outcome of me choosing to have children and they're all going to be serial killers gives me moral culpability.
I'm saying, so Heidi, one of your kids commits murder. Are you culpable for your child's action?
If I knew before they existed that was
No,
absolutely...
Heidi,
I'm telling you.
about the real life. Talking about real life.
Well, in real life, my kids wouldn't murder.
One of your children murdered somebody, despite, I'm sure you're a great mum and you've brought your kids up as best as you can. For some unknown reason, one of your kids murders somebody. Are you going to be held responsible?
No, and also that's not analogous.
No, you're not.
For the reasons I gave.
That's why God is not
analogous.
That's not analogous.
Do you understand why it's not analogous? Because I didn't know.
God is not responsible for the choices that human beings make.
He is. The reason why it's not analogous is I didn't know. Do you understand that? I had no way of knowing when my children were actually murderer.
Yes, Heidi, we agreed, but we also agreed that God's exhaustive foreknowledge doesn't necessitate that it's causal.
I never said it was.
We agreed on that.
Point to me where I said it was causal.
You agreed on that.
I do agree it's not causal. It's irrelevant. The point is you know. Not that you caused it, but you knew it would happen, right? And you did it anyway.
Well, so what? Is God culpable?
Yes.
Is God culpable for human cruelty?
Yes.
No.
Oh, good argument, Gavin. Good argument.
That's when you guys are so out of your depth.
How?
You're talking theology now.
How?
And you're so out of your depth.
Well, explain it. How?
Well, explain how, if I know my children are going to be serial killers, and I have them anyway, I don't get sterilized, let's say. Explain how I'm not morally culpable for those murders. If I knew what was going to happen, and I did it anyway. Go ahead.
Okay. I will tell you again, and this is the last time.
Right, you can't explain, can he? You can't explain, can he?
Because we want to move on.
Yeah, Gavin, you couldn't explain, thank you.
Look, you could say God's foreknowledge. You could say, God's foreknowledge.
God is not responsible for pain and suffering, because human cruelty and suffering does happen, and we know it happens because God does not intervene to prevent humans exercising their free will or their ability to choose otherwise.
Could God allow
would you just be quiet?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know you guys are so excited.
Stop with the matter. Go ahead. Stop with the matter.
I know you guys are so excited. New realm of theology. Oh goodness, we can make it.
Gavin, we're just waiting on.
It also would be to deprive human beings of a choice that makes them humans. That's why God is not culpable for pain and suffering.
Okay, so let's just run the analogy again, right? I still am not pregnant. I could get sterilized.
I know.
Why are you interrupting me? Why are you interrupting me?
No, we're moving on to premise 5.
Oh, Gavin Connor.
We had 4 theists that agreed with premise 4, and no atheist could really come up with a good rebuttal.
You couldn't answer my question, Gavin.
Premise 4.
The whole room had no answer. The whole room had no answer.
80 schooled you can't.
Premise 5 is,
Gavin was cool.
Prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. And the world is morally imperfect now.
Wait,
the action of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world.
Wait.
I don't agree with that for a minute.
Did you say...
I'll say it again. If prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect.
Okay, wait.
How could the world be morally perfect?
Gavin, stop.
This is prior to God creating anything.
You're just contesting P2. P5 is got.
No, I'm on P5.
I know, but P2 is there.
Prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect.
You agree? No, what you agreed to that?
Created anything yet.
Gavin, you agreed to it already. Don't you remember
the world is morally perfect.
Gavin, you're agreeing to this. You agreed to this, remember?
If prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, and the world is morally imperfect now, then the actions of God has decreased, right?
That's right.
Has decreased, has lowered the degree of moral perfection of the world.
Correct. How's that wrong?
What a nonsense statement.
What's the action they're talking about here?
Why do theists think that God is somehow culpable for the actions of human beings that have free will?
What are the
What is
actions that are being referred to in that premise? What is the action? It's creation.
Premise 5. If prior to God creating anything, yeah, you have to be patient, Heidi. You know,
yeah, you said it 3 times. I'm asking you what is the action that they're referring to. The action they're referring to is creation.
Focus.
Reading the premise out.
Prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. Right? So the world is morally perfect, but God hasn't created anything yet.
Correct.
According to this premises. Right? And the world is morally imperfect now.
Correct.
Then the actions of God have decreased the level or the degree of moral perfection of the world.
Yes, and now you're going to tell us why it's wrong, right? Instead of just repeating the premise over and over again. Why is that wrong?
Why is God culpable for pain and suffering?
Is he responsible for his actions?
You're not answering my question.
Okay, well, I'll tell you. It was the same analogy I gave. I would be culpable if I created serial killers. He created humans who he knew would do evil, including lots of serial killers, but that's by the by. Therefore, he's morally culpable.
No, it doesn't work that way, Heidi.
That's not a rebuttal.
God's exhaustive foreknowledge does not necessitate that it's causal.
Yeah, no one's saying it does.
No one's
saying it does. They're saying he's culpable.
This is common theology. This is a common theological point.
Gavin, have you already agreed to P1 and P2? Did you already agree that those were
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, so you agree, the P1, if God exists, then God's a morally perfect being, and P2, the world is morally imperfect now. Correct?
Yeah, that's pretty old news, Jason.
I'm just saying, I'm just confirming, you agree with that, right?
Yeah, mate, let me think. Okay. Yeah, I did, a few hours ago.
And did you also agree that P3, the God is a morally perfect being, and that prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect? So you agree with the first 3 premises?
I did agree. Okay. Initially, I disagreed to premise 3, but I revised my position and agreed to P3. Yeah.
Okay, so all P5 is doing is restating P2 and P3. It's saying prior to God creating the world, it was morally perfect, and if the world is morally imperfect now, then they're making a conclusion based on those 2 concepts that then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection. So that's what you're taking, you're opposing, I guess, is that the fact that the world was morally perfect before creation, and then after the world was created, it became imperfect. You're saying that's not a result of God's decreasing the degree of moral perfection. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, explain to me how God is culpable for the moral degradation of the world.
Well, if God created the world, and the world was perfect before creation, and then post-creation, the world was imperfect. It seems that the actions of God in creating the world that was before creation was perfect, then he created the world and it became imperfect, that his actions have resulted in a decrease in the moral perfection. It just seems to be just extremely clear. I don't see how you would get around that.
Begging the question, Jason.
How am I begging the question?
How did God creating the world cause it to become degenerate? And
because he knew it would. Because he knew it would. He knew it would. He had all the knowledge necessary. He had all the knowledge necessary.
He had exhaustive foreknowledge of the future.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and that's what caused. That's what caused the moral degradation of the world. Is that correct?
It's not his foreknowledge, Gavin. It's not. There are multiple facets of the Christian God, the tri-omni God. So it's not just having knowledge of the future. It's his all-powerful nature to create the world in the way that he wanted to create it. He chose to create the world, and in that choosing to create the world, he chose to create it in an imperfect fashion. So as such, his actions of creating the world decreased moral perfection, decreased it from moral perfection before to less than moral perfection after creation.
Yeah, Gavin. So what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism that caused the world from being morally perfect to becoming morally imperfect?
His omnipotence and his omniscience.
Creation.
Really?
Proactive creation caused moral imperfection.
Okay, this is a great example of atheists floundering when it comes to theology.
What's the rebuttal?
Well, if you be quiet, I'll tell you. This is where theists are floundering when it comes. That's not theists, atheists. Atheists flounder when it comes to theology. You don't mention anything about in the creation, the human beings that God created have the ability to choose to do otherwise. You don't mention anything like that, do you?
He created humans who he knew would choose evil, yeah. That's what he did, right?
He created human beings with free will. Now, why do you think he created humans with free will?
Because he's evil.
Why do you think?
Because he's evil.
Because he's evil.
Look, am I going to say I'm going to create my serial killer children because I want them to have the free will to kill people?
No, the reason he created human beings with free will is because pure love, real love, has to have free will attached to it. Right?
So he wanted them to love him. Right? He wanted the love. And he wanted it to be a free love, right? Because that's the better kind, right?
Would you shut up?
Well, no, you're interrupting me.
Shut up.
You said something about perfect love. I'm now responding to you, and you're interrupting me. He created humans because he wanted them to freely choose to love him, right? Yes?
His preference was for his creatures to love him.
That's more important to him than all the pain and suffering that would ensue from creating these creatures who he knew would choose evil. That was more important to him, that they choose to love him. Sounds like a narcissist.
Probably in your world, Heidi, yeah, but this is the real world we're talking about.
Oh, well, I'm absolutely not talking about the real world. We're talking about
your fake world, Gavin, not your fake.
Real love has to have freedom attached to it.
I agree.
Freedom comes risk, obviously.
I agree. That's what he wanted. He wanted this free love. That is the best kind, right? You don't have to force people to love you, obviously. But that was more important to him than preventing all that pain and suffering. Yeah, great God. Good God you've got.
Well, put it this way. He is the perfect God, and far better than any custom-made God you guys want to dream of.
You just described a narcissist, but go on.
Well, Gavin, let me ask you. Let me propose this to you, Gavin. Let's say someone confronts you with this question. Gavin, would this particular serial killer exist if it weren't for God? How would you respond to that?
I'd say, of course not. Everybody is made in the image of Dei.
Right. So the reason why serial killers exist is because God willed them to exist, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
All right. So, premise 5 is incorrect. If prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, and the world is morally imperfect now, then the actions of God have decreased the moral perfection of the world. No mention of creatures there, or human beings exercising their free will and their free choice. So, that's wrong. So here's the conclusions. If God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. If God exists, his actions cannot decrease the moral perfection of the world. Well, that's wrong. Why would that be right? Give me an argument for that, atheists.
Can I just clear something up? Gavin, do you take causation to be transitive, meaning that if A causes B and B causes C, that A caused C?
I'm not familiar with that, so I can't really comment.
Well,
that's the conclusion.
Gavin,
then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. That's a nonsense statement. So, how would you atheists like to justify that?
Gavin, if God knows I'm going to drink orange juice over coffee, can I drink coffee?
We've already talked about how God's exhaustive foreknowledge does not necessitate that it's causal. It's a
no, I don't
bit
say
of
that
a
it's causal, but if I were
question.
to drink coffee, even though he
So
knows
back to conclusion one. If God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the moral perfection of the world. That's a terribly wrong view. It's a terribly wrong statement. So, what's right about that statement, atheist?
Transitivity is just a property. And it's pretty...
Conclusion one, if God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world.
So,
Gavin, can you let What's your argument for that? What's your argument for that, atheist?
It's pretty uncontroversial that transitivity holds for identity. So
if God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world.
Gavin,
what's your argument? What's your argument, atheist?
Gavin, shut up. Let Billy finish.
Yeah, I think they've responded to that, Gavin. Hold on a second, Billy. 1 second. I think they have responded to that, Billy. You know, they don't agree with it. Okay, fine, we can move on. But now, for what Billy's talking about, the transitive argument, I'm actually familiar with that. But go ahead, Billy.
So it's pretty uncontroversial that transitivity holds in the case of identity. That if A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. It's more controversial in the case of causation. That if A caused B and B caused C, then A caused C. There are some philosophers who deny that transitivity holds in
yeah, you know why they do,
in the case
Billy?
of causation.
You know why they do? Because it can become
problematic counterexamples. That's why.
Well, the reason why it can become problematic, for example, Ted Bundy raped and murdered many different women. Now, Ted Bundy stated, now whether you agree with him or not is that's not the point. Ted Bundy stated that his involvement in pornography led him to this particular mindset. Now, let's say that that is the case for the sake of the argument. According to the transitive argument that you're proposing, one would then have to argue that pornography caused the rape, but we don't say we agree with that. Well, this is where the transitive argument. I'm not sure. Where well, some people don't, but this is where the transitive argument can become problematic if that's what you're going to be beholden to, because there's been many arguments in the past that death music has caused people to commit suicide and this and that and the other. So I understand what you're saying, but it also can be very problematic too if you're going to hold to that.
No, I understand that, but look, I think that there are some important distinctions between the two cases. And I'm not sure whether causation is transitive myself, but I do think it's transitive when it comes to an agent and when it comes to an agent who knows the outcome of said actions. I think it's going to be transitive in that case. For example, if I throw a ball at the wall, if I throw a ball at the window and then the ball causes the window to break, I think it's fair to say that I caused the window to break. However, if I, light a cigarette and then unbeknownst to me, I cause the fire alarm to go off, and then the fire alarm caused the sprinklers to go on. Seems weird to say that I caused the sprinklers to go on. Now, maybe you can say that, but I don't know that me lighting a cigarette is going to cause the sprinklers to go on. So, maybe you can say it's not transitive in that case. But if I know, for example, that lighting a cigarette is going to cause the sprinklers to go on, and I purposefully light the cigarette, then I think it's fair to say that I've caused the sprinklers to go on. I know it's going to happen. And so in the case of God...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
Well, let me try to explain it this way. This may help, but I'm not sure. Being that I'm a Reformed guy, so there's some Christians that may not hold my view, but that's fine. But being God is is sovereign and in control. For me, as I look at it, in control of what? Some things, most things, no, all things, including rape and murder and etc. Like for example, I'll explain what I'm talking about. But for example, some Christians would argue, well, look, God allowed this particular evil act to take place. He just permitted it. That doesn't really address anything, I don't think, because he permitted it based on what? I look at it as God permitted it by design. Now, a lot of Christians will be like, oh, what did you just say, Johnny? Well, yeah, if you're going to say that God is sovereign and he is in authority and he does have a plan for all things that do happen, you're also going to have to say he permits evil to happen by design. That's what you're going to have to do. You cannot get around that. And the way I look at it is, yes, creatures do have a will. It is a sinful will. Creatures do have a volition. They are going to exercise that volition based on their sinful nature. In other words, as I said earlier, Hitler really did want to have Jews slaughtered. He wanted that. And the way I see it, in my worldview of how I see God in control of these things, God realizes that the creature is sinful. And I spoke earlier, Billy, I don't think you were here at the time, but there is a default in God bringing about creatures. These creatures are not God. God cannot lie, but the creature by default can. Why? Because it's not God. But being the creatures are going to do evil, and God fully understands this, it's not just a matter for me of, well, he just has the foreknowledge of what creatures are going to do, and he's just reacting or sort of weaving the puzzle around because he just has foreknowledge of what they're going to do. I don't look at it exactly like that, because that just seems that God is not really in control. He's just reacting to the things that his creatures are doing. No, God is in control about what the creatures are doing. He understands that his creatures are going to be evil, which consists of rape and murder and thievery and all of these things. And being that that's what God does understand, the creatures are just going to do evil on God's terms. In other words, he's going to decide when and where this evil occurs. It's just going to occur on his terms. But the person doing the evil is still evil, and God is going to punish that person. And that too is part of his plan.
So I don't understand how that's a response to anything I said, so I'm just going to ignore it. So the point is...
You didn't understand anything I just said?
I don't understand how it's relevant.
I thought it was very relevant, but okay, Billy.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about whether causation was transitive in the case of a being, an agent, who knows the outcomes of their actions. And I was arguing that it is. and then you rambled off. You didn't mention transitive once. You didn't mention an agent clause once.
Didn't mention it once. I just gave the example of why I do understand this transitive argument, and I was talking about the example with Ted Bundy and pornography and all of these things. I mean, I'm just acknowledging that, yeah, Billy, I hear what you're saying, and I understand. Excuse me. I understand what you're saying. And then when I talked about the will of man versus God's allowance and permission of things by design, and how God is directing and managing evil, and they are going to do evil on God's terms. God is in control here. I mean, I thought that would pretty much sum it up of any issue that you might have, but you said it was just rambling.
Too much crackling, Johnny, on the mic.
That's fine. Keep going, Johnny.
I just want him to fix it. It's not that I don't want to hear him, Gavin.
Yeah, sorry, Cookie. I don't
Thank
know
you
if
so
that's
much.
any better, but
It stopped. Yeah, thank you.
my mic is terrible. I think it has more to do with the Clubhouse app, because if I make a phone call, everyone says it sounds fine, but for some reason this Clubhouse app.
When you don't use it and you speak directly onto the phone, you sound so much better. I wish you were doing that. It sounds so clear.
Yeah, I apologize.
No worries.
So, should we move along? Because I don't want to get
Before we do, Gavin, I just wanted to be clear. BB, you've been in this conversation, or you've been listening to this conversation for quite some time today. Do you agree? I'm not saying do you believe in what I'm saying, but is what I'm saying, does it at least make theological sense to you?
I'm afraid not. Sorry.
Okay, very well.
Okay. So we'll carry on?
Wait, can we just address what I asked, which was, is causation
No.
hand?
No, Billy. No, Billy. No, thank you.
Well,
we're sticking to the syllogism.
Okay.
And we don't want to go down foxholes chasing different red herrings. So, the theists disagree with if God exists, then his actions cannot, if God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. If God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection of the world. We agree with that, didn't we, Johnny?
Sorry, Gavin. I'm doing something in the background. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No, I think we disagreed with that claim because it doesn't take into account the cruelty and suffering inflicted by humans, human v. human. So conclusion 2, if God exists, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. We agreed with that. It's a bit of a waste of space and ink. Conclusion 3, if the world is morally imperfect now, then if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. That is a huge fallacy of being the Christian. It's a wrong conclusion. So would you atheists want to justify that? Justify why you think it's true?
So are you pushing back and saying that, well, it could be the case that God created like free agents and then free agents caused evil. But it's not the case that God caused evil because you're denying transitivity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, God doesn't cause human cruelty and suffering. We're quite capable of inflicting that on each other ourselves.
But he does cause humans, right?
He creates human beings, yeah.
Yeah, great. And creation is a type of causation.
Oh, brother, you're so transparent. God has exhaustive foreknowledge of the future, Billy. We've already discussed this. But his exhaustive knowledge of the future doesn't necessitate that his exhaustive knowledge is causal.
But
So,
God does cause human beings to come into existence on your view, is that correct?
Billy, yeah, you know that's correct. Under the Christian worldview, God creates human beings in the Imago Dei.
Right, so it seems like the only way you can push back on that premise is to deny the transitivity of causation.
What are you eating, Billy?
Yeah, you're so rude, Billy.
I'm eating a vegan chicken wrap.
What in...
Yeah, well, how about you finish eating the vegan chicken wrap and then talk to us?
Billy, what in the hell does that taste like?
Tastes great, actually.
How do you have vegan chicken? What does that mean?
It's made of like soy chunks or something.
So it's not really chicken, Billy? Come on now.
Oh yeah, it's vegan chicken.
Is that like sort of the what's it called when you get that stuff in the store? It looks like crab meat, but it's imitation type stuff, and it's not really crab meat at all. But they still call it crab meat. Is that what you're talking about, Billy?
No, it's better than paying for animals to be killed unnecessarily.
Okay.
Okay, can we keep going? We're almost finished. So, conclusion 3, if the world is morally imperfect now, then if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. It's a begging the Christian fallacy, so it's a wrong. It's a big wrong. It's a big cross. If any atheists want to support that with reason, you're welcome to, otherwise we'll keep going.
Yeah, so I gave you I didn't necessarily give you an argument, but I can as to why I think that transitivity of causation applies to agents when the agents know the outcomes of their actions. So I think the transitivity of causation applies in those cases. Given that God
didn't Johnny give you an argument pushing back on that?
No, I didn't hear one.
He didn't. He didn't.
I didn't hear.
Johnny, did you not give an argument against Billy's hypothesis of what's it called?
Yeah. Transitive argument. The Ted Bundy example. Yeah, I did mention that.
Right. So that was your pushback against Billy?
Yeah, I mentioned that could be problematic if you're going to hold to that in sort of a diehard fashion. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's
so
the problem. No. Because what I
said... Yes. You've had a pushback, Billy.
No.
You've had a pushback.
No. Because...
Yeah, you have.
I said no. Because...
Yes, you have.
No.
Johnny, did you push back against Billy's assertion?
No.
About transitivity?
I did.
Okay.
Stop.
You're done with Billy. You're not going to keep repeating yourself.
Stop.
So, conclusion 4. If prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. Again, that's a being Christian claim, and it's saying if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. Can you move Billy down, Johnny?
Yeah, no,
then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world.
I don't know why he's over
That is a being the Christian fallacy, so it's wrong.
Gavin thinks I'm going to stop.
Billy,
you need to be moved down.
Hold on, Gavin. You finish what you're saying, and then if Billy wants to come in and challenge what you said, then we can have a turn.
look, I was told that you pushed back, right? But what you said was prior, and then I pushed back. What I said, that transitivity of causation applies when free agents know the results of certain actions. That was my pushback to your Ted Bundy example. So
Are you a free agent, Billy?
What difference does that make? The point is that when you say that that there was pushback, that was the previous thing that you said that I pushed back on, and there was no pushback to what I was claiming.
Well, you're just arguing based on the foreknowledge of this particular agent, in this case God, versus the people in this sense, the Ted Bundys, which is the example that I gave you, and saying, well, there's a huge difference there because, Ted Bundy didn't have this foreknowledge. Well, he still had a desire. Where did that desire come from? What is the origin? If you're looking at origin, if you're going to point to the origin of God, whether he has the foreknowledge or not, in this particular case, is not going to matter because you're looking at the transitive argument based on the influence. Regardless of the foreknowledge, you're talking about influence. What is influencing an action? And the reason when I mentioned Ted Bundy, he is stating that the influence of his behavior was pornography. And that is the point. Regardless of whether he had foreknowledge or not,
Johnny,
I don't think that makes a difference.
What was the claim that I made?
You're talking about the transitive argument.
What was the claim that I made?
That God is to be culpable because A caused C, C caused...
Okay, I'm done. I'm just going to leave because, look...
So, is that what you're saying? Is God culpable? Is that what you're trying to say?
Billy, just leave.
Tell you.
Just leave, Billy.
I'll leave in 1 second.
Let's go to conclusion 4. If prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. That's the fallacy of beating the Christian claim. If any atheist would like to oppose that, feel free.
Yeah, but the thing is, they may try to oppose it, but the thing is, Billy was trying to conclude that God is culpable. That's where he was wanting to lay the blame at God's feet. And for Billy to say, well, no, that's not what I was doing, of course that's what he was trying to do. I mean, this was very obvious. So, but he was trying to say why the analogy that I gave is irrelevant based on having foreknowledge. I don't think, I thought the foreknowledge issue that he was bringing up was irrelevant. He was wanting to blame God for this.
Yeah, I know. Look, even the atheists have agreed, Johnny, that God's exhaustive foreknowledge does not necessitate that his exhaustive foreknowledge is causal. The atheists have agreed to that.
Well, as much as we can explain something or answer a particular issue they have, they're going to still continue to say, oh, I don't agree with it, oh, I don't accept it. No, Johnny, your theological explanations really don't make sense to me. I don't understand them. Whatever the case, they're not going to get it. They're not going to capitulate. They're not going to come to some sort of conclusion that we arrive at because, number one, and people love when I say, oh, it's because they're atheists. Well, there is something to do with that. If God does not open a person's mind, they're not going to see things the way those that God versus the ones that he has opened to see. They're not going to see the same thing. So at the end of the day, as much as we answer these questions, that's really all we can do. But trying to argue and then persuade and to get someone to then acknowledge, that's what I don't really care so much about. In other words, regardless if I answer these questions, I'll give an answer. But at the end of the day, you still see God as the one culpable and the one to be blamed, then okay, go ahead and blame God. That doesn't matter to me, the Christian, and I'll tell you why. Because you want to blame God, okay, so what? What are you going to do about it? You're just not going to worship God? Okay, there's a reason why you don't worship God according to Scripture. I have answers for all of these things that they're talking about. They think God is evil. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? Are you going to overthrow God? You're going to kill God? No, you're not. At the end of the day, God is the final authority. There is going to be judgment. and he's going to judge those that think he is to blame. What are they going to do about that? Nothing. Nothing at all. So for me, if they continue to hold the idea that God is at fault, it doesn't really matter to me.
The hypocrisy of the atheists is palpable because they're trying to pin culpability of human suffering and cruelty onto God, but they don't believe God exists.
Yeah, they're doing the yeah, it does seem
an internal critique.
Yeah, they're doing an internal critique. But what I don't like is when you do make points. When I say you, I'm not just speaking you, Gavin. I'm talking about anyone. When Christians do make points that I think are a bit problematic, some atheists, I'm not saying this is what is happening in this very case, but some atheists will try to jump out of that and say, oh, but I don't believe in God. Well, wait a minute. You don't get to do an internal critique, and then when someone makes a point, your response is, well, I don't believe in God anyway. Okay, then don't do an internal. Don't try to play that game if you're just unwilling to play the game. You don't get to jump out. So, but my point is, ultimately speaking, atheists are going to blame God. That's just what they're going to do. I mean, you're not going to have them conclude it in any other way. And what I'm saying is, does it matter to me really that an atheist blames God and tries to hold God culpable, and they say, well, God's evil and he's a monster? Does it matter to me that that's what they think? No, because I actually expect them to think this. I'm actually not expecting something else.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, but you have to remember, there's or you don't have to, but a lot of Christians, this isn't necessarily an atheist critique. I mean, this is mainly a critique that comes from within. The evidential problem of evil of William Rowe is just that's inconsequential compared to how divisive this topic is within Christianity. I mean, there's Molinism, there's other forms of understanding this problem. So when confronting, so I don't think it would be helpful to say the atheist. It's the Christian is the main, the main one here that's going to be objecting to these ideas.
Well, yeah, I get that, but what I'm saying though, Daniel, is, I mean, even within the Christian body, there's some disagreements on a lot of these things. Like earlier, I don't know if you may not have been here earlier, Daniel, but I hold a position that John he holds the sort of the opposite position to that. For example, I think the question was, could God have not created? I think that was the question. I would say no. But John would say, well, yeah, God could have not created the universe. So we hold a different position there. And although I think John is wrong, and I explained it, now whether John is going to, mull that over, and maybe not, maybe just says, well, John, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with you, whatever, fine. But at the end of the day, does it even matter if God could have created another world, or he could have not created? Does that really matter to the fact that this is what he did? He did create. Does it matter whether he could or couldn't have? I don't think so. Does it matter if a person thinks, whether they're a Christian or not, they think that God, just simply allowed evil to happen? Or those of my position that would say, yeah, God allowed evil to happen, but he allowed it by design. Does it matter if those two particular Christians disagree on that issue? I don't think ultimately, because here again, at the end of the day, God is still going to do all that God has done and is doing and is going to do. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to somehow throw a wrench in God's plans? No. There's nothing anybody, any atheist, any Christian, any Muslim, any Jew, any pantheist, There's nothing anybody can do about it in pertaining to the Christian God. So we can have these particular conversations, of course, and some are very fruitful, but what are we going to do about it? God is still God. He's going to do all that he has done and is going to do. And he doesn't require our input, doesn't require our permission, doesn't require any of that. So that's why I say there's some things to me, it doesn't really matter. It is what it is, and it's going to take place whether I agree with it or not. It's part of the reality that I'm talking about. What are we going to do about it? How much do we really know about God, right? We're finite little pipsqueak human beings, and we're trying to argue who this God, the creator of the universe, really is and really thinks and really does. I mean, for the Christian, yeah, we have Scripture, but is the finite little pipsqueak human really going to get it all figured out? I don't think so. You're talking about a God here. You're not talking about a president of the United States.
Yes, sir. So, we're almost at the end here. This has been long, this has been drawn out. It seems like nobody can justify conclusion 4 of prior to God creating anything in the world was morally perfect, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. I don't hear any atheists justifying that, supporting that. I don't hear Rob Speakers justifying his own syllogism. Imagine. Conclusion 5. We're almost home. If God exists, then the actions of God have decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. Another fallacy of begging the question. Therefore, this claim is wrong. Would any atheist like to justify conclusion 5? Now's your chance.
I just wanted to comment quickly on what Johnny had said. Yeah, I get it. It's not everyone's cup of tea to think about these questions like, well, could God have created? Did he, what does that matter? Who cares if God could create or not? Right? I mean, so the lay person doesn't care about this stuff. They just listen to their preacher, but there are certain people that are interested in the theology of it. So they're going to want to ask a deeper question like, what does it tell us about God if this God was forced to create? So the idea is that, yeah, I mean, if you're not interested in theology or not interested in thinking about things beyond just the lay observer of the faith, then that's fine. But questions like, could God have created or not created? I mean, these are questions that people have been asking for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And there's been conflict between theologians and stuff like that. But if you want to say that God must create, then you're going to be saying something about God, which is that he's forced to do something. He's not free. He doesn't create freely. There's something about God that is like, he has to do this, which is odd because God doesn't have to do anything.
I just look at it a little differently, and as far as what you're talking about regarding that theological question, could God have not created? I mean, I answered that earlier. Now, you weren't here, Daniel, but again, that's a position that John Lee holds, that, yeah, God could have not created. And I said, well, wait a minute. If you're going to say that there is a case where God couldn't have created, that means he would have to have a will to not create. So does God have two conflicting wills? One to not create and the one to create, and he just happened to go with the one, which was to create? Does God have opposing wills there? No. No, he does not. The reason why God could not create, I'm not talking about power. I mentioned the difference between power and will. I have the power to pick up a firearm, or I have the power to not touch it and keep my hands to myself. But what is my will? What is it that I have a will to do? or rather a will to not do. Either way, we see what God's will is. It was to create. That tells me there was never a will to not create. Therefore, because God didn't have the will to not create, he cannot not create. He can only create. Why? Because that is what his will is to do, was to create. To me, that's not difficult. For some people it is. For me, no, not at all.
Yeah, I understand.
All right.
But I would just want to say that it seems to me that when we talk about God, we want to speak about this God in terms of he's free to do what he wants to do. And you're saying that he must do something. So there's a state of affairs in which it's just God alone. And then there's another state of affairs in which there's God in creation. So, I mean...
Yeah, but the thing is, though, Daniel... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think people are looking at it in the sense of, well, God created this world because, he loves people and he wants people to love him, and that is the reason or the main reason why God created this world. For me, that's not the main reason. The reason why I think God had to create this world is because of the love that he has for the Son. And love is meant to be shared. So if you are loving, then by that, the actions are going to follow from that. Some people would say, well, he was forced to do it. Well, I mean, am I forced to be attracted to my wife? I mean, I am attracted to my wife, and I do love my wife, but am I forced to love her? No, I don't see it like that. I don't see it as force. But love is indeed meant to be shared, and because the Father has a love for the Son, he is going to share that love, and he is going to express it in many different ways. And one of the ways is to create this world and bring about creatures, one of which are human beings. But part of the love he has for his Son is to give his Son gifts. And in this case, livestock, so to speak, the sheep. So I think a lot of people look at it as, oh, well, God created me just because he loved me. No. Sorry, sweetheart. That's not the case. He created you, in the grand scheme of things, as I'm looking at, he created you because he has love for the Son. That is why he created people. That is why he has given gifts to the Son. That is why these sheep, the elect, are gifts to the Son. Now, ultimately, of course, yes, we benefit from it. And just like a father would love that which is pleasing to his child, yes, in that sense, God does love us because we now belong to him. The gifts belong to the Son. So, of course, in that regard, we are experiencing that love too. But just initially speaking, it's not that God just created us because he just wanted someone to love, and he just simply wanted someone to love him. He already had someone to love. He already had someone to love him. That's the Son. So there is a bit of a difference, I think. I don't know if this makes much sense to you, Daniel, or makes much relevance as far as you're concerned. But
no, it makes
there is
perfect sense.
Yeah, this is a bit of a difference in how people look at creation and look at themselves and look at the relationship they have with God. And they tend to think that, we are the apple of his eye, so to speak, and that's why he made us. No, you're not that great, Mr. Human Being. So, I mean, did that make sense the way I described that?
Oh, absolutely, it made sense. It makes perfect sense. So your view is just, it's different than John's view, and I think that your view obviously is more consistent. No offense to John.
Well,
I know that he has...
my view is more... John is a heretic, and he's on the verge of being excommunicated. That's the way it's... I mean, it's all about to dump him as well.
Excommunicated. I haven't had a burning at the stake for a long time now.
I thought maybe James was going to take John behind the woodshed earlier today, but he didn't have to.
Well, can I follow up real quick? Because I don't want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me follow up because I don't want to seem like I'm praising. Yes, that view is absolutely consistent. But it's going to commit you to certain things like what will be referred to as necessitarianism. The only possible world is the one in which we inhabit, this world itself. So there's going to be some philosophical things to discuss, but in terms of its consistency, it's perfectly consistent to say, in fact, in my view, necessitarianism is the most consistent theological position.
I am a bit of a necessitarian. I've said that before to others when they're talking about it. Now, as far as every single detail, I don't know. I'd have to go through them, but I do see some in my views that do reflect necessitarianism, and I don't have a problem with that.
So we've got an objection from Floyd FP, and his objection is the Bible, God does intervene in human affairs, thus your argument fails. So Floyd, please come onto the stage and defend your claim.
Yeah, it's your argument. It's not Johnny's argument. Johnny's being consistent with his Calvinistic theology. You're being inconsistent with your libertarian free will.
How so?
Because you claim that God doesn't intervene, but clearly you have examples in the Bible where he does intervene. So
he does intervene, yes.
Yes, true. So he's interfering with their free will.
Yeah.
They claim he does it.
No, listen. There are instances in the Bible where God does intervene in the normal state of human affairs, in the sense of raising the dead. That's a good example. But these are miracles, right? They're miracles. He does intervene. In the state of human affairs. But it's very rare. So my statement, just a minute. My statement that human cruelty and suffering happens because God does not intervene to prevent humans exercising their free will is still true. Right? Yes, it is.
Where the Bible doesn't say God respects libertarian free will. Where in the Bible does it say that? Or he respects?
It doesn't say that anywhere, and you're just being silly now.
Well, I got a question.
So what's the argument from? Is it biblical, God?
Even if God intervenes...
Yeah, it is biblical, Floyd FP.
Even if God intervenes in society and interacts with man, does that imply that he undermines man's free will?
If he stops...
undermines man's will...
If there's libertarian free will, and each human agent is the first cause of his action, and God stops that action, he's intervening.
Well, I think...
Now, in Calvinism, that's not a problem, because God is determining...
You think
God and determining how to
disrespected Paul's will, what Paul wanted, when he met him on the road to Damascus?
Can you say that again?
You think God was violating Paul's will when he confronted him on the road to Damascus?
Yes.
It doesn't seem like he really was, because Paul was zealous. He thought he was doing something for God. He seemed to be wanting to please God, but God just showed him, hey, you can't please me by your own actions, and he revealed himself on it. It doesn't seem like it was undermining what Paul wanted.
Not the strongest example. Right? I would say that the strongest example of God violating, air quotes,
someone's free will is the book of Jonah.
That came to
You got
mind.
Jonah.
That came to my mind before you mentioned him. But the only problem that I do have is you did say the quote. I don't think God violates anything. And Matt Adams argued a while back that the man himself does not have a right. God has a right to do everything that he does.
That's why I said
I'm not blaming the
because
Calvinists here. I'm blaming Gavin who holds libertarianism. I have no problem with Calvin. Calvin's more consistent with this.
Well, I've got a quote from a guy. I can't remember. I think he may be a Calvinist. And I can't remember. And his quote actually, if I can find it, actually talks about what God's doing is not really violating what man wants, but it's also that man doesn't have control. If I can find the quote, I'll read it and see what you guys think. Hold on just a second.
This is a quote from Calvinist, you said?
Calvinists,
Can you hear me?
most Calvinists hold Calvinism.
Fred, do you believe God exists?
I got it. I found the quote.
This is relevant to the internal
See if
critique.
you guys agree with this. From C.H. Spurgeon.
Like
A
the
man
last
is
time
not-
I tried to internal critique.
A man is not saved against his will, but he is willingly made by the operation of the Holy Spirit. A mighty grace which he does not wish to resist enters into the man, disarms him, makes a new creature of him, and he is saved. Would you guys agree with that?
Yep, he's also a Calvinist.
Yeah, I mean, that actually goes right along with what I actually believe according to Scripture. There seems to be this mutual almost will in which the person who is saved is actually also wanting to be saved, even though they don't have the will to save themselves, but they're wanting that at the same time the Holy Spirit is saving them. So, yeah, I actually like that quote. That's from C.H.
Who says that they're wanting to be saved?
I have to
Yes.
agree, even though I'm not of the Reformed camp.
I guess Echo brings up a question there. Does he want to be saved only after he's regenerated? Before he's regenerated,
This
no,
implies
he
that
would
it's
not want to
happening
be
simultaneously at the same time. You want me to read it again? And a man is not saved against his will, but he is made willing by the operation of the Holy Ghost. A mighty grace which he does not wish to resist enters into the man, disarms him, makes a new creature of him, and he is saved. And that's from C.H. Spurgeon. That's to me one of the best quotes I've ever seen.
So he's not asserting that this is something that's innate in man. This is something that happens at the time of God's grace is upon the individual, right? So there's no turning back once this happens to an individual, right?
Yeah, and the guy's not, the person isn't resisting it either. The person is simultaneously willing and wanting to be saved by God at that point.
Yeah, you are willingly
God's order. God's order is God regenerates the man first, thus changing his will. Thus, with the new will, being a new creation, he willingly accepts God.
Yeah, you then have a desire for God willingly. You do come to the cross. It's not that you're still coming against your will. It's not that. Once God opens your eyes and changes your heart, you then are attracted to God. You will come to Christ freely in that sense. It's just you just simply have a new heart. And I've said this before. You can only do what's in your nature to do. What your nature influences your desires. But once God changes your heart, He is giving you a new nature. And now you're simply operating from this new nature. And in this nature, you do have a desire to come to Christ.
Right, so he totally changes your will. He totally changes your nature. So the question is, does God initially violate your will to basically give you a new will?
Well, how about let's not use violate, because you don't have a right to any.
Well, okay, let's just say change. Let's just say change.
Yes, this is why I've said to before. Like, for example, Floyd, you're an atheist, right? You're an atheist, right, Floyd?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I've said this before. It would take a miracle of God, an act of God, for you to come to Christ and become a believer. This would take an act of God to do.
Correct.
So yes, it's exactly in keeping with what Spurgeon is talking about. But once God does intervene in your life and change your heart, you then are going to come to God freely and willfully, because now you desire God.
And irresistibly, right?
Irresistibly, correct.
Right.
It's like, and this may be a silly analogy, but it's like, did you ever see the movie Shallow Hal?
I've heard of it.
I did. Yes, where he falls in love with this girl he thinks is good looking, and she's really, like, massively huge.
Okay, exactly, Matt. Now think about this for a second, Matt. Everyone else is seeing her as this, fat, unattractive, overweight person. He's like, what are you people talking about? She's beautiful. But notice what Tony Robbins did. He changed his way of thinking and the way of seeing, so to speak. But once that way of seeing was changed, he willfully had a desire for whatever, I can't remember her name, the girl who played that part, but nonetheless, he willfully had a desire for this person. He was attracted to this person. Gwyneth Paltrow, exactly. It wasn't that something was forcing him, it's just that his view was changed, and once it was changed, she became attracted to him, although some other people would say, are you kidding? She's unattractive. Well, atheists see God as unattractive. They don't see God as attractive whatsoever, but we do, and they can't even understand why we find God attractive. But once God does to them what he does to us, they then will see God as being attractive.
Right, so effectively what happens is God gives you a love potion, right? He gives you a love potion.
You could make that analogy. I would accept that, because it's right.
It's a movie analogy. That's happening. God gives you a love potion to make him love you. To make you love him.
He changes your heart, and from that, you're automatically going to be attracted to God. That is what is going to happen. It's like,
it's a love potion.
Look at what in Scripture where Jesus healed look at it this way too. In Scripture, Jesus healed the blind man. Well, after Jesus opened this person's eyes, this person is now thankful and grateful and appreciative. They now see Jesus as sort of their big hero. Wow, you opened my eyes. I now can see. Look how wonderful you are for doing what you did. Effectually, what Jesus did to the blind man, yet Jesus had to initiate it. Jesus had to intervene, and it was all by an act of Christ to open his eyes. But once his eyes were open, effectually this man that can now see became a fan of Jesus Christ.
I like that Shallow Hal analogy. That was good. And actually watched that movie several times, by the way. It's pretty good.
Let me read a quote from another Calvinist theologian. This is C. Michael Patton. This is from his Calvinist Understanding of Free Will. He writes, while I believe in free will, I don't believe in libertarian free will. We make the choices we make because of who we are. We are responsible for these choices. God will judge each person according to our righteous judgment. Is there intention? Absolutely. We hold in tension a belief in God's sovereignty, determined who we are, when we live, where we will live, who our parents will be, our DNA, etc., and human responsibility. While this might seem uncomfortable, I believe it is the only is not the only best biblical option, but the only philosophical option outside of fatalism, and we don't want to go there. So here he's asserting, a compatibilist version of free will, where we decide what we do. We do what we do. We do what we desire. nothing's forcing us to do what we want to do. We do it on our own will, but God decides our will. God decides our nature, and God decides our greatest desire. We're always going to act on our greatest desire. And who decides our greatest desire and our nature and our will? God does.
Yes, this is why, like, for example, if you see, take some poor person sitting on the street that's, obviously in need, whatever. Now, let's say I just walk by that individual. That individual sees me. Does he just automatically like me? No. I haven't done anything. I'm just a guy walking by. But let's say I stop and actually help this individual. Take this individual and buy them something to eat and show compassion for them and do things for them and put them in a home and whatever, change their life. I'm affecting the way this individual is now seeing me. This individual now likes me for what I have done. My actions brought about an effect. And this is very similar to what we're talking about in regards to what God does. And I mean, for some, God just walks by and does nothing. Well, okay, they're not going to automatically be attracted to God. God has to do something to produce an effect. And God simply does that with some people, produces an effect. And with others, he just walks by. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't produce an effect. That's why they are not attracted to him.
People don't like that type of talk.
You disagree with it?
No, not a single bit.
There you go. There you go.
Some people don't like that kind of talk. They don't like when there's any type of opposition to their own autonomy. So you gotta be careful. Be careful how you speak around some people.
I thought the shallow how analogy would really probably make more sense to those who've seen the movie. I think Matt said he's seen it. But
yeah, it's actually a good analogy. And I think that quote I gave from C.H. Spurgeon, that's one of the best quotes I've ever seen in explaining the salvation process in which man comes willingly. At the same time, God is bringing him to him. He's willingly coming. And sometimes I've heard people give the analogy that it's almost like God is dragging the person and they're clawing their way, trying to get away from him. And I just don't think that analogy was very good. But I think what Charles Spurgeon said here showed that it's kind of a combination. Man is willingly coming as God is changing his heart.
Well, I quoted real quick, Bickle. I quoted Spurgeon in my book as well, Matt. I'm very familiar with Spurgeon. He's a big Reformed guy. One of the quotes that I like that he said too, and I think this pertains to those talking about salvation and some that think that you can lose salvation and whatnot. But I think if I'm stating him correctly, he said, "It's good that God chose me before I was born because he would have never chosen me afterwards." I love that.
Say that again, John. I kind of missed that.
That's awesome.
He was talking about in reference to, the names in the book of life were there before the foundation of the world and things like that. But it was also a response, I believe, to those that think you can lose your salvation and all this and that. But he said, "It's good that God chose me before I was born because he would have never chosen me afterwards."
Yeah, that's a good point. There was what's the MacArthur guy? I like him too. Who's
John
is in California. I remember
John
when I had
MacArthur?
the debate. Yeah, I had the debate about losing your salvation, and see that's the funny thing is like sometimes the Calvinists, the way they argue just nails it for me. I mean they say it the best, but then there's some times where there's some stuff that I'm not so sure of. The way some things are explained, but Charles Spurgeon and then the guy I just mentioned in California, he said one time, at one of his quotes, he said, if you could lose your salvation, you would. And I just thought that to me,
John MacArthur
speaks volumes. Yeah, because I remember one of the things that I was told when I accepted Christ as my Savior. The person, and they may have been a Calvinist, I don't know, they didn't really talk about it. They said Satan's gonna make you think in your life that you've lost your salvation. And he said, you can't never believe that lie. He said, because there's nothing, and he basically said, you didn't do anything to earn it. You can't do anything to lose it. Because if you could do something you lose it, then that means you're helping earn it. And I remember him saying that to me, and that stuck with me. Yeah, and that stuck with me kind of my whole life. I never forgot it.
I think MacArthur. I'll stop talking, Beckel. I promise.
No, that's
MacArthur. I think he said something. He may have said that, but I heard MacArthur say one time that if you think you can lose your salvation, you've already lost it. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, that's he probably did. But I remember I actually quoted him in the debate I had with what's his name, Taylor, because Taylor thinks you can lose your salvation, and I quoted MacArthur saying if we could lose our salvation, we would. and in that debate, Taylor, who thinks we can lose our salvation, agreed that there's nothing we can do to be saved. There's nothing we can do to be justified. There's nothing we can do to be sanctified. And there's nothing we can do to be glorified. And he agreed that it was all the work of God, but yet he thinks you can lose your salvation. And I never really could figure it out. I was like, how in the world, if you think God is doing this whole thing through you, the Holy Spirit is working through, how is it that you think you can lose your salvation? And I don't think he really understood how he answered those questions. But I mean, that's the thing sometimes. I guess it's in our nature sometimes to think that we are somehow helping God.
Yeah.
It's just that human nature. But, he clearly answered the questions the right way when I asked him. But then he still thought you could lose your salvation. I just found that strange.
Yeah.
You might not be able to lose your salvation.
Well, I was going to say...
you might not have had it in the first place, right?
Well, I was going to say earlier... somebody mentioned about, dragging and stuff like that, dragging them into the kingdom. I've heard testimonies like that, actually. They use that type of hyperbole to describe how God brought them to the Son. One of them being C.S. Lewis, I think, in his testimony, he said something along the lines of, I went into the kingdom kicking and screaming, something like that. And a friend of mine was
for example. That is a piss. John, this is an example John Lee comes up with. Now let me ask you something real quick, Matt. Do you think you would ever hear John Lee give a Shallow Hal analogy like that? Of course not. He wouldn't. He would, of course not.
What analogy?
Gives all these different. He explains Calvinism in such a way that people are left with hating Calvinism. The thing is, too, John, I'm picking on John a little bit. The thing, John has said that, talking about dragging, and he used an example of casting a fish net in and pulling the fish out. And I said, here's the only problem with that, John. At no point do those fish want to be in the net. They continuously want to be free and out of the net. They never want to be into the fish basket, so to speak. And so I said, that's not really a good analogy. When God changes a person's heart, they do want to be a follower of God at that point. So the fish thing is another John Lee blunder. And this is why when I have that conversation with him or the debate with him on the local versus global flood, I'm going to roast him like a shish kebab.
Well, I think that the reason why some people speak that way about their testimony is because maybe it's an example of what they were like prior to them coming to Christ. Like, for example, you hear stories like Lee Strobel or General Lew Wallace. These were atheists at one point that had an attempt to debunk the Bible. And even though the truth was revealed to them on multiple occasions, they rejected it until one day everything just made sense. I think maybe that's what people are using when they're saying that they came into the kingdom kicking and screaming sort of thing. Not that it literally happened that way, obviously, but there was an effort for them at first to debunk Christianity.
Yeah.
And in their endeavor, they ended up becoming a Christian. So
I think you're right, Beckel, because I remember before I became a Christian, and I would be driving down the road, and I'd turn on the radio, and there'd be some preacher preaching about getting saved, or I'd turn it to, I couldn't turn it fast enough. And like, get me, I mean, and I remember I did, you know, even though I had grew up in church, after I got about 16 or 17, started getting my own independence, I didn't want anything to do with it. But then, you know, there was always a nagging in me as well. There was always this emptiness, this something that seemed like it was missing. But still, yet, when I'd hear this idea of being saved and stuff, I didn't really want anything to do with it. And then one day when I was at work, there was a couple of Christians. They were talking about this, you know, the gospel and being a Christian and being saved. And I was like, you know, I'd heard that term on the radio, but the church I went to was a Methodist church. I don't remember them ever using the word saved in a sermon or anything, or getting saved or salvation or anything like that. And I remember thinking, I've heard that word before, and I started kind of inquiring, and we kind of got into a conversation that lasted for quite a while. And I did a lot of the atheist things. That, yeah, well, you know, if there is a God, then, you know I've been a good person. You know, he should save me. And I said, I believe there's a God, and I'm a Christian, but I mean, he should. And they said, well, why should he let you into heaven? I said, well, I've been a good person and all this, but you know, that was kind of my view. I said, I've never murdered anybody. And then they just basically started sharing, you know, scripture. You know, it's not by works that you've been saved, lest any man should boast, but it's a gift from God. And, you know, and whenever they started talking about that, one of the things I immediately started recognizing was that my own standard of goodness I was not meeting. I had this idea of what I thought was good, and it was kind of my own, you know, this probably compass, that, you know, what God had put in my heart. But I also knew that I wasn't meeting my own standard, what I considered good, and much less what, you know, Scripture, you know, the standards that, God, you know, when Jesus would say something about if you've looked at a woman with lust, you committed adultery, or if you have hate in your heart. Obviously, if I wasn't meeting my own standard, there's no way I was meeting that other. And I remember, and when he started saying it's not by works, lest any man should boast, but it's a free gift from God, I started wanting that. It was just, I recognized, and I think it was the next day or so, I accepted Christ as my Savior. At work again, we started talking about it again, and that was the next day I did that. But I could tell I went from, during that process, from probably not wanting anything to do with it to realizing that that's what I was missing. And it was during that whole process. And that's kind of how it worked. It was, and I do remember I wanted to be saved. But I will say, like you said, Beckel, if you'd have asked me a week or so earlier, I probably wouldn't have wanted anything to do with it. So I think you're probably right. That's probably why when people say, like when John uses the analogy, you're being dragged or caught, I think there is that process where you are being caught, but then there's that process as it's happening.
There's that resistance.
You won't it. Yeah, there's no resistance anymore.
Right. I like how you said, you reminded me of something someone said to me at church one day. They said that they used to be a good person, but then they got saved.
Yeah, there's a G.K. Chesterton quote. He said, a good man knows he's not God, and the better he is, the more he knows it. And I kind of thought, you know, that was me, because I actually kind of thought I was my own God. But once I realized I wasn't my own God, then technically at that point, that was when I was really a good person, not because of anything I'd done, because of what the Spirit had done within me, had changed me, and I recognized that I wasn't God, and that I recognized I wasn't a good person apart from what Jesus Christ did. And it is a mystery. I mean, it's something we really, when we even try to put it into words, sometimes we can't really explain it fully. But it's kind of something that you're kind of in awe to think about, the whole process of how you go from not wanting anything to do with God, and even, you know, wanting to run the other way to, at that moment, calling out to God and accepting Christ as your Savior.
Well, Matt, I think Spurgeon, it was also Spurgeon who said, I'm not 100% on if it was actually Spurgeon who said it, but nonetheless, whoever said it, I thought it was actually very excellent. He was talking about the nature of man and how man sees himself, but he said, man is not as good as he thinks, but he is actually worse than he thinks. I thought that was very profound.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, many people will say, yeah, I may not be as good as I think, but how many people actually say, I'm probably worse than I think that I am? And that was his point. That was the salient point that I took from it.
And not many people.
I think that could be true for me. I mean, you'd think, oh, I'm pretty good. I'm getting pretty good at this. God's kind of changing me, and then you kind of realize, maybe you ain't quite as good as you actually thought you were at that moment. And it seems like the older we get, the more we read Scripture, understand Scripture, grow closer to Christ, the more we realize that those moments where we thought we kind of were getting it together was when we didn't have it nearly as together as we thought we did, and it was still a long, gradual process. And that's kind of what's kind of fascinating about it.
I've often said, too, in a way, that the more you look at Christ, and the more you look at who God is in His holiness, in His perfection, you'll tend to be self-loathing in comparison. Because once you understand who God is, and then you try to start understanding who you really are, and you make that comparison, you won't like who you really are.